Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 219. My name is NBZ, and I'm not drowning in nappies. That is something that I believe Bally is still doing to this current point in time, and we wish him well as he swims through all of that. But I am joined this time by someone else, another guest to the podcast, and refreshingly, someone who lives also in the UK, a fellow Brit. I'm joined by Matt Lorigan, writer for Xbox Achievements, PS Trophies, and contributor on the Video Gamer podcast. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm also not drowning in nappies, so that's excellent.
It's a good place to be, you know. I wouldn't want to. I don't wish it upon most people, but you know, Bally can deal with it. You know, he's got that down, and I'm sure he'll be doing well with it. So
yeah, I'm sure. I'm thrilled to be here. Been listening since I think since the Switch came out. Essentially, you know, no one was covering Nintendo for a while, right? And then.
Yes, except for us. Yeah. We were just trudging on through the Wii U eras and not much going on there, but we still had a show. But yeah, for a while. And it's interesting, I guess, because you write a lot about the other consoles, but you're a big Nintendo fan as well, right?
Yes, yeah. Like, nothing quite gets me as excited as a Nintendo Direct. You know what I mean? Like, you get an E3 and stuff like that, but something about a Direct coming around, you're like, oh god, this has the potential to be really special.
For sure, yeah. I always find that stuff like State of Play gets announced or Xbox do their presentations. I'm like, yeah, I'll be interested to see what happens here, but there's nothing. It doesn't have the kind of same buzz to it, you know. It doesn't have the same kind of like vibrating of the air, you know. As you're like, anything could happen here with a Nintendo Direct.
I can't remember anything that hit like the Metroid Dread drop. Like that double whammy of like first 2D Metroid footage and then the name Dread, right? Like that double whammy was absolutely insane. I really enjoyed like the PlayStation, Xbox stuff, like Elden Ring getting shown off for the first time at the Game Awards, the Summer Game Fest. I think it was
Summer Game Fest. Yeah.
And that's always exciting. But Nintendo. It's been the consoles that I've sort of grown up playing the most, and the franchises they hook you in. Their franchises, don't they? And then they don't make any in a franchise for 10 years, and then they drop you one little morsel, and then you get all excited. That's how Nintendo works.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just a quick question to start the show. What is your favorite game? Your favorite Nintendo game? Just to get a sense of like what stuff you really enjoy.
I mean, the easy answer is Breath of the Wild, right? But
yes, of course.
That hit in a very, very special way. But I mean, I love sort of the Donkey Kong Country games. I'm a big fan of. Like, that's one of the first like SNES games I remember playing on my older sister. She had the Super Nintendo, and I vividly remember playing a lot of Donkey Kong Country, and the newer games are brilliant as well. Elden Ring is up there at the moment, outside Nintendo.
Climbing slowly.
And a big sort of long-time Pokemon fan as well. So I've got a lot of love for like Pokemon Platinum. That's when I really got into like competitive scene and EV training and all that sort of stuff for the first time. A lot of stuff. That's the wide view. But I mean, God, every bloody Mario game is fantastic and
awesome.
All of that. Couldn't go into everything, but Breath of the Wild is probably still up there in my head as being the all-timer.
It's really funny, right? Because I think that game, somehow it's everyone's favourite game, but also it feels like, but it's everyone's favourite game. But it is so good, right? Like, it is just so incredible that...
It is so good. But I also can't remember exactly why it is so good, which is a weird thing. Because the further we get away from that release, the more I'm like, well, I know for a fact that I absolutely loved it. And every time I go back in and play it, I not got that first experience again. Do you know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah, it's the magic, right? Yeah. It's like the magic of discovery and all that thing that makes it kind of a special experience in people's minds. But I'm waiting to have that again when the sequel comes out, which I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that. Got delayed, but that's a whole interesting thing going on. The last thing I want to ask you is. On the Video Gamer podcast, they refer to you as Matt from Upstairs. What's the origin of Matt from Upstairs?
So that was what our offices before lockdown. we were in a building where we had our main office upstairs, which is where we were all sat with the computers and stuff like that. And then downstairs was the podcast recording room and like the video recording studio. Mm-hmm. And I used to come down again for like small segments. I wasn't there for the full pod, so they'd be recording, and then they would just say, we'll go get Matt from upstairs. As in, literally, we'll go grab him from upstairs. But now it's stuck, which I really, really like. Yeah, to the point where I was like, should I make that my Twitter handle? Rather than like my actual full real name. Like,
yeah, it's fun. I think it's a good moniker. It's a nice thing to carry with you, and you know, like me, you just carry that for the rest of your life, right? It just becomes the name that you get stuck to.
Yeah, the man known as MBZ and nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. The man, the myth, the legend. So, anyway, so yeah, we have a lot of stuff to talk about on today's show. Lots of video games, lots of stuff. We are going to be obviously talking about what we've been playing at the start. We'll get on to some of your emails you have sent in, and then we're going to do a little bit of a chat about secrets in video games. I think there's a couple of games released recently that have been very secret focused, and maybe we just chat a little bit about what that all means and the different types of secrets and all that good stuff. So lots of things to dig into, but let's kick things off with the video games we've been playing. And Matt, I know you've also been playing Kirby and the Forgotten Land, a game which I have now finished. I don't know where you are in it, if you finished it as well. But yeah, that game's pretty good, right?
That game is pretty good, and I have also finished it, and I've done the post-game stuff as well. The only thing I haven't done is the third tournament.
Okay, yeah, the Colosseum stuff, right?
Yeah, but yeah, I have finished that, and that game is really, really good, actually. Because I am not a massive Kirby fan. I don't know about you.
Yeah, me neither. Like, I like the kind of spin-offs and stuff like that, but I've never gotten into a traditional regular Kirby game that deeply.
No, and it's really weird for me, because Kirby was always my main in Smash growing up, from like the N64 game. So I've got this deep attachment to Kirby and all the things surrounding him, and also all of the stuff in Smash that I never realised was from Kirby. Like the parasol and all the weird stuff like that.
Yeah, you can tell, like, Sakurai's involvement certainly had an influence, especially when you think about Brawl and the Subspace Emissary mode. Like, a lot of that is basically a side-scrolling Kirby game in the way that it's designed and all the items you have and all that sort of stuff. So there's a through line you can definitely see between those series.
Exactly, right? But I've never massively got into the Kirby games. The closest I got was Planet Robobot, and I enjoyed that, and I played for like more hours than I would normally. But yeah, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, it's the first one I've really, really fallen in love with. Like, it's up there now with one of my favourite games on the Switch. Like, I just think it's absolutely... It's not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but I've just had such a good time with it. I don't know about you. Also, it's gorgeous, right? Like, yeah,
it's really pretty, and I think that increases as you get further into the game, right? Because I think about World 3 last time that we checked in, and I think that's probably the best part. Like, as you go on, is like seeing these new environments, the way they kind of twist things. Because I really love the game, but I think that like the back half of it gets a little bit not samey, but I wish they had introduced a bit more of the fun stuff, right? So like, I really like the evolutions to each power-up, and that's really cool because you get like 3 versions of each one, and I think I maxed out every single one, right? You have to get the rare stones by doing all the challenge levels, and I think the only ones that I didn't get were the addition to Sleep, or maybe Sleep only has 2 evolutions, maybe the Crash one and the Sleep one I think only have 2.
Yeah, they both only have 2.
Right, and I didn't really find a use for Sleep. Is there a use for Sleep, or is this just a joke in the Kirby series generally that you just like get it and it just puts him to sleep and then he loses it again? I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I think Sleep by itself is meant to be useless because there's one. Wait, is this game or another Kirby game that I played? I remember playing one level where there's a bunch of sleep things, and the idea is that you can't suck them in, otherwise you fall down off the level. So I think the idea is that you don't want to suck them in, they ruin it. But the sleep evolution then powers you up. You take a big nap, and then you get like a boost to either your speed or your attack. So that actually does have a use. So that's one of all the ones to power up in the game, that's the one that you want to do, because if you get one of those, like before a boss fight, you're able to, you take it. I mean, it's really funny. I mean, the animations in this game are really good. Like, there's a lot of love thrown in there, right? And I love the fact that when you upgrade the sleep one, you suck in the sleepy guy, you get this big hat, and then you open up a bed, and then you just have to wait there for like 20 seconds while he has a nap. But if you do wait it out, then you get like an attack boost or a speed boost, those sort of things you normally have to pay for back at the Waddle Dee village.
Right, yeah.
But other than that, it just seemed to be a joke. Like,
it is. It really is. I do think that, as you mentioned, like there's kind of a section where you have to avoid a bunch of them, because if you get in contact or if you suck one up, you'll just basically, there's like falling blocks, and if you do that, then you'll just be screwed over. So yeah, but it's an interesting way to use it as an obstacle. One of the fun ways in which I've seen enemies like that used, which is kind of a subtle way that they point to some of the objectives in the game. So some of the objectives I find like, okay, you have to beat this enemy with this certain power up. You kind of don't know that going in, and there's no real way to know. So it's a little bit of, forcing you to go back through the level. But there are some where ideally, you would know how to do them, but they're a bit more obscured. So there's a little section where you can find this pool, this hidden area, and there's a sleeping enemy on the lounger. And I killed that enemy. And then I noticed that the enemy respawned again.
Exactly.
I'm like, what? There has to be a reason for that. Like, why is that happening? So I was like, okay, I wonder if this is an objective thing where I need to turn into the sleepy Kirby and then just sleep on the lounger. And hey-ho, it turned out that was correct, and that was an objective that otherwise I would have had to get to the end of the level and the game would have revealed it to me. And in some senses, it wouldn't have been as interesting, because then I'd be like, oh, I'll just go there and do that.
Yeah.
But I like that they have that, like, it's a really subtle thing, just like having the enemy respawn before I left, and I was like, oh, okay, it is the game kind of guiding you towards those objectives a little bit more, and those are the ones I preferred more so than some of the other ones that I think stopped me. I don't know, did you 100% the game? Was it something you went for all the waddles? Okay.
I started in the first... I don't know if you did the same. In the first world, I was like, oh yeah, I'll try and get every single one of every single level. And in the first few levels, it's obvious. Every single one's obvious, right? You don't really miss any of them. And then the first one that I missed, that I just went, oh, I had no idea that I was going to do that, and I don't know how I would. I was like, okay, I'm not going to, replay every level twice in a row, because I'm going to burn out on this game quicker than I need to. Last night I did start going through, so I've gone through the first 3 worlds, and I've hoovered up all of these in those 3.
Okay, got
but
you.
I legitimately don't know if I'm going to keep doing that. This was more of a, I haven't got anything else. I didn't have access to the TV. I had the Switch, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll play around a little bit. But the thing is, the objectives are really fun. It's just, those ones are the least enjoyable, because it is just a case of either you did it the first time round, right? You do something, you kill a boss with using a certain weapon, and it comes up being like, you did the right thing, and you're like, oh okay,
yes,
real well done, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
But
otherwise it is tricky, right? Because so I 100%ed the first 3 worlds straight out the gate. I basically went through all the levels, then before I moved on to the next world, I would go back and 100% everything. And that came to some of my frustration with the things of like, okay, well, I only needed 1 Waddle Dee in this area, and it was the second one, but now I need to finish the rest of the level for it to count as me having done it. Which, is just a bugbear of mine personally, and, I wish that they would kind of fix some of that stuff, but as I mentioned last time, I think part of it is there are certain challenges where, don't step on the mud the whole level, and they can't confirm that until you have finished the level, right? So they tie it up in some of those ways. But I think the point at which I was like, actually no, I'm not going to 100% it, was there's a level on a big bridge, like in the snow, and you're kind of going forwards and you're fighting like 3 bosses in a row, and the last one you fight is the Twin Frosts, which there are 2 kind of polar bear guys who are attacking you. And in order to get through this objective, you have to beat them without taking a single hit. And this happens with some of the boss levels, and I think those generally are fine, because you're just going straight to the boss, and there's no kind of build-up or anything. You're just kind of in the fight, and if you take a hit, you're just like, okay, I'll just restart again, and it's not too bad. The problem with this one is that this boss fight happens like halfway through the level, and there's no easy way to reset it, because if you reset it, you have to go fight the other bosses just to get back there. So I ended up just like dying like 3 or 4 times, losing 100 coins every time, which is annoying because the coins are helpful for upgrading and everything, just so that I could reset at a checkpoint so I could then jump back in. But also because the game, even on wild mode, is not that difficult, you don't take that much damage from them, and your flashing kind of like invincibility after being hit lasts for a while. So like just dying to them every time, because I kept going in, getting hit like straight away out by accident, and then I'm just like, okay, I just need to die now as I'm just sitting here as they kill me slowly. And I decided like I didn't do it. I was like, I'm just gonna leave this now, I can't be bothered. So like I think that they needed to be a little bit better about some of those objectives, because that one in particular was just, it was a pain point that kind of stopped me from 100%ing the game, which not great.
That's exactly where I stopped as well, but I didn't get as far as you. I saw it
yes,
and I went, no,
No, just not doing that.
I saw that because I'd already done like you say, the boss ones where it's like don't get hit. I found those frustrating enough as it is. Just like the fact there's not a restart level button, the fact I have to exit out into the world and then sort of jump back in, and like it was the cheetah one where I was really struggling, and it's the least fun way to fight them, as well. Is the problem that I find. Like I end up using the tracking bombs for basically all of them. Because it means that I can just run away from everything,
right,
and throw the bombs out and let the bombs do it. But it takes so much longer, and then if you do get hit during that, so like
it's that tricky balance between like, okay, the patience of doing it, but then because you're spending longer on the boss fight, it means that you're more likely to get hit, versus being a bit more aggressive going in. You'll do it faster, but you have a higher chance to get hit, right? In a small period of time. I tended to favor the fire a lot in this game. I think part of it is because if you burn an enemy, they still keep taking damage. So like Coraline, the cat lion character that attacks you, jumps up onto the rafters at a point, and like if you have already done damage to her, she will still burn and like take a bit of damage even she's up in the sky, and some of those fights definitely, it's hard to not get like hit at least once, by like a little chip damage or like a little thing that you didn't expect. So I agree on that front. It's I did them for a while, then I was like, nah, especially when the end of the game just gets pretty wild, right? Like there's a lot of boss fights, and I felt like getting towards the back half, right, there was the final area where I enjoyed it, but I think it was at a point where I was kind of done with like all the powers, and I'd seen them all the mouthful mode stuff I'd also kind of got bored of or kind of tired of to an extent, and then you get to the end, and I kind of like, I feel like the very end of the game really brought it up in my estimation with some wild stuff that happens, because I was kind of flagging a little bit. I don't know how you felt by the end, but I really wish there was just a bit more variety in terms of the mouthful abilities you get, because it feels like maybe up to world 3 or 4 you've seen all of them, and then they just kind of repeat them more, but like with a little bit more complex scenarios. But
it's really the mouthful mode stuff is really front loaded, is the thing, right? So you get to see all of them in their simplest form by like you say, about world 3. I think you get the water balloon one. I feel like that's the last one that you see. Yes. And so that is very front loaded, and the same with the copy abilities, right? So you see all the copy abilities within a certain amount of time, and then from then on you're getting the evolutions and the upgrades, and they have a little bit of extra sort of utility depending on which one it is, but you've basically got all of your tools by a certain point, and I think it does a good job in terms of then pushing that forward. So you get to a certain point, like the car race in sort of the final worlds are a lot more complex, or whatever mouthful mode you're using, there's more to it, and it does sort of expand upon that. Honestly, I feel like if I'd maybe taken it a bit slower, I would have had more fun. Like if I'd left it for a couple of days, then come back. But I think by the time you get to that last world, you can tell it's the last world, right? And the sort of the pace of how everything's going feels like it's escalating, and you're like, well, I need to get to the end of this. But then, like you say, it goes bonkers.
It's like this game has no story, and then at the end it's like, okay, here's like, it's Nier Automata.
Oh god,
it's like what?
I mean, do we want to talk spoilers at all, or?
You know what? I'll put a timestamp. I'll put a timestamp in. Okay. So if you want to skip, let's give people like, spoilers are coming, klaxon sound. There are spoilers for the end of Kirby. If you're in your car right now listening to this podcast, I'm giving you ample time right now as I'm talking right now to skip. So yeah, I guess you fight God at the end of the game, or some kind of like creature that is like genetically engineered from Elfin, who's like, or it's like the alternate half of Elfin, your little friend character.
It's some sort of eldritch beast, isn't it? And it all goes very Dragon Ball Z as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. I absolutely love it.
I kind of expected a twist, because as you're going up in the elevator at the end as Kirby, and it's kind of rising to the top, and you have the kind of tannoy speakers going and talking about this creature. I'm like, is this talking about Kirby as like this eldritch thing that's come and invaded this world? I thought there was going to be that sort of twist on it, that Kirby was going to walk out into this crowd of people, and there's going to be some hero like facing down Kirby, because Kirby's the real enemy. But I guess they kind of went the bit more traditional route with it. But there's the section where it turns into a bunch of goop and like chases you down a corridor. Yeah, especially as like a kid's game, ostensibly what Kirby is, and especially like the kind of challenge that you get in that very final fight as well, where it's like soaring through the sky and like dive bombing you, and you always have to use the move that I didn't really use the whole game, which is if you're blocking and then
dodge,
you use the analog stick, you do bayonet a witch time to dodge out the way. I feel like a lot of kids are going to get to the end of this game and be like, I need help, please. I can't beat this.
100%. I'm curious how it is on Spring Breeze mode, to be honest, because like playing it on Wild mode, I was like, this is now difficult. Like this game has not been difficult for 5.5 worlds maybe, and all of a sudden I'm in a fucking Elden Ring boss fight, having to like time my dodges perfectly. I didn't use it. I literally only used the sword ability for like that final boss in the end because I was like, nothing else feels right. Like everything else just feels like I'm just like I've got one power and that's it, whereas like at least like did you get the Meta Knight upgrade?
I did, yeah. So
sword?
I think if you fight the Colosseum the first time,
you
get a really good fight against Meta Knight actually that I enjoyed
really good,
quite a bit, and definitely feels like, you know, if you wouldn't skipping the optional stuff in the hub town, I'd recommend people go and do that because it gives you obviously that power up which you can't get otherwise. But also if you're at full health, it does the Zelda thing of sword beams for being at full health, which is really cool. Obviously, in that fight particularly, you get hit pretty quickly, so it's hard to maintain that. But it's still like a more fun way, especially because there are certain moves like you can dash and then jump, and he will do the kind of almost Meta Knight soar through the air with his stab.
That combo is great. Like that was entirely what I was using for that boss fight. The little like duck, little knee slide, jump up in the air, and then this big like combo thing. And yeah, that it really goes hard at the end. Like Kirby just gets, it goes mental. And then you got the amazing sort of Dragon Ball Z truck stuff.
Right. I was wondering, like, what is the mouthful mode thing going to be at the end of this game? And no, it's just a truck, but you're trucking through space essentially across like debris that is falling down as you like cannon yourself into this giant flying Final Fantasy final boss. You know, it really does feel like the end of a JRPG, except you're Kirby in a truck.
You're Kirby and you've got Optimus Prime in your mouth and you're absolutely flying at this giant, god thing that's going through the air. No, I think I had a similar thing to you. I think I was maybe flagging a little bit by World 6, but the final sort of boss section, that weird lore reveal that just seemed to come out of nowhere, it all really elevated the game for me. So that's my sort of defining memory of it. And have you done the sort of the post game world?
So I jumped into a little bit of the post game stuff, and for me it's just not really for me. I think it's a lot of just remixing the levels that you've already gone through. They add a bit of a collectathon to it, so you have to find these 50 things in all the levels, and they're much longer levels as well, which makes, I think, playing through them again to like pick up collectibles you missed a little bit more frustrating. Though I believe you don't have to get every single one. You don't kind of fill up a meter. But it to me was like, okay, cool, I played through one of these, it was pretty long. There's a much harder version of that first boss fight at the end where I was like, oh my god, this is kicking my ass, like really difficult. So it feels like if you do want that challenge that the end of the game provides, this is probably for people like that who want to go and do the rest of it. And I've heard there's some story payoff, but I don't know too much about it.
There is, and you get the final blueprint at the end there, and that is
cool.
That is very good, and then that's what I've been using to do the challenge run. But I think it has its issues, but I think it's the best Kirby game that I've played. I think there's some really clever design decisions in there, because I think the thing about Kirby games is they've always been around about sort of player choice in a sense, right? You can beat the game with any copy ability or no copy ability, right? Like the majority of the levels you can run through, you can never pick up anything up, you can fight the bosses just sucking up all the stars, and that's how Kirby's always been. But I think mouthful mode is actually a really clever twist, because it's not, that is essential. And it means they can actually put some good level design in around something that you have to have. And that's why I've struggled with Kirby games in the past, is because I sometimes I'm running through the levels and I'm like, this level feels like it's designed for maybe a copy ability, maybe not, but they can't fully. I don't have to.
They don't know what you have, right? Because there's no. The design can't be intentional because of the ability you have to choose any approach, and all the weapons do damage, right? But they don't necessarily have, there are actually in this game, interestingly, some of the objectives force you of like, oh, you have to have the fire ability to light the torches so that you can unlock this, right?
Well, that's the thing, yeah. That's why I've enjoyed this game so much, I think. It's the combination of mouthful mode and the optional objectives and the optional waddle dees, because those do require certain copy abilities and they require you to think about what you're doing. So
exactly, yeah.
Rather than just having these levels that you could just sort of run to and get to the end and be like, did I do that right? Because that's what I've... In previous Kirby games, I get to the end and I'm like, didn't feel good doing that. Like, I think I had the wrong ability.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But also because he can float, right? It almost feels like you can just avoid everyone, just go through the level and be done. And I'm like, is that a video game? I don't know. I just kind of skipped everything. And that's a really good point, I think, because the mouthful mode like adds these layers that you have to engage with and you have to think about things a bit more to progress, right?
Yeah, and like while I wasn't bothered about doing all the optional missions, I was absolutely on board with getting all of the waddle dees that were like hidden around the levels, and every single one of those is like normally around some sort of copy ability or some sort of mouthful mode, and it just gives this. Yeah, it makes it more intentional. It makes the level design feel way more intentional, even if you could just because like you say, when you go and replay a mission, right, you do end up just like flying through it. It doesn't take more than like a couple of minutes to get through a level because you're just like, I just need to get to this one section, and you do just fly. But those levels took me ages because I was searching and I was making sure I had the right thing. And yeah, there's this level of intentionality to it that feels so much better than any Kirby game I played before, and I think that's why this has clicked for me, where other ones hadn't. And I think it's it sales, apparently it seems to have sold better than most other Kirby games, especially in the UK at the very least, looking at the charts and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, right? It's the continuous story of every time a new franchise or an old franchise gets a new entry on Switch, it's like, well, it's just going to default be the best-selling entry because that's just where we are right now.
The Switch effect, right?
Exactly. But I think this is a little different because we have had Kirby games on Switch already, and I think Star Allies did decently, but this, because it is taking it in a new direction, because it's being 3D and kind of mapping its path into a new territory and doing it really well, I think it's got a lot more people interested. I don't buy Kirby games generally, and I bought this one because it was something different. And
I think so. I think that the fact that it has this sort of level of game design that I really enjoy is maybe appreciate all the things that have always been in there in Kirby, like the absolutely like the love of the animation, like the fact that if you complete a level or unlock a waddle dee, if you've got full mouthful mode, Kirby does a different dance for that mouthful mode, right? Like, there's so much love. It feels like they cut no corners making this game. I can't remember the last game I played where it really felt like there's so much stuff they didn't need to put in there, like the the little post office in town.
Yes, yeah.
And you go up to that, and Kirby pulls a ballpoint pen out of his pocket and goes to go write it down before the little keyboard comes up. And I'm like, they didn't need to do that. There's no need for that at all, and there's so much that little bits of animation throughout the game that just it feels like they just had unlimited budget to just go, we're going to make a big Kirby game.
Right, and it just elevates it, you know, like sitting down at the fishing hole, his little hat on, and he's fishing and getting the giant fish. Oh my god, those fish are big. Also, the super big one that I had to get took a while to get that button prompt down. I think like there's a certain button you have to press that is like almost immediate. You have to know exactly what it is, and if you're like even half a millisecond off, it won't work. But did manage to get the big fish, which was great. And you've got the little tilt and tumble thing, which is fun. The gyro. Actually, the first time since like 1-2 Switch where it feels like, oh, there's a ball rolling around here, they actually are using HD Rumble in the way they kind of first initially pitched it when the Switch was new.
You're right, and the little, the little collectible like Kinder Egg inside things that you get, even when they open, the little sort of like feel of like the squeeze inside the controllers. It was the first time I've noticed HD Rumble in absolutely ages.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's also in a weird way makes me annoyed that the Smash on Switch does not have trophies, because it's like, oh yeah, Kirby, let's do some trophy opening and like gachapon stuff, and then you just go to this little table where there's this giant. I guess Kirby is regular size, but you're seeing him as a giant, just like staring at his little trophies, just a smile on his face. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, a lot of care and attention to detail, I think, just went into the game, which is really nice to see. And I really I want to see what they do next with this, because I think they built a great foundation that they can do more interesting things from, and I wonder, where they go after it. But
I'm curious if we'll get some DLC actually, because it's missing like a Meta Knight mode, which I now know a lot of Kirby games have. So
oh, interesting. Okay,
I know Star Ally's got a lot of extra DLC, which people say has made it a much better game since. So I'd I could go for a little bit of Kirby DLC in like 6 months' time. That feels like it'd hit the spot quite nicely.
Yeah, add a couple more mouthful modes in there. I'll get back in. See Kirby as, I don't know, a toilet probably is what's next on the list. Who knows? There's so many different things he could be, but
literally anything, right? That's the
yeah, it's great. In any case, we have also been playing some other Kirby games. I know you might have been playing a few more than me, but I decided to play Kirby's Dream Land because I heard that it was very short, and I was like, well, this is the original Kirby game on Game Boy. It was before Kirby was pink, in fact. On the box art in the US and Europe, I believe he is white, which is mainly because the Game Boy didn't have color at that point in time. It was original Game Boy, so you couldn't really tell that he was pink anyway. And I don't know if that was the intention or if that was like something that, the distributors overseas just got as a mistake, but it's interesting nonetheless that the first Kirby game is in black and white, and you don't really have that association to it. But this game is really fascinating because you don't have the traditional thing that we associate with Kirby, which is getting the copy abilities. He just floats and shoots out air from his mouth and kills enemies that way, and you can also suck up enemies, but you can't basically absorb what they have.
Yeah.
And fascinatingly enough, there are I was playing through this, I'm like, man, they really haven't changed much of the enemy lineup in Kirby in these 30-odd years that this character has been around, because you see Poppy Brothers Jr., you see the Cutter guy, you see, like, the floating regular enemies and Waddle Dees. Like, they're all here. The Waddle Dee who does the spiral thing out of him, the kind of electric spiral, he's there as well. Like, so many enemies, including King Dedede, are all there right from the beginning, and it's really fascinating to see, like, oh, there's the Cutter enemy, but I can't get the ability from him, and yet he existed before that. Like, it's such a weird thing.
That's the funny thing, right? It's funny the enemies were there first, and then they worked their way back, and they were like, so what does Kirby do if he sucks up this enemy in future games? Like, we're like, not going to introduce new... Well, they obviously did introduce some new guys, but they're not...
Yes.
They weren't like, we're going to create an entirely new cast and then work it out from there, like... For example, something like Mario Odyssey, right? Like, there's a few enemies that you can suck up from older games, but the majority of those... not copy abilities, what are they?
Capture abilities, right?
Yeah, capture abilities are new creatures. But no, with Kirby, they just went, suck up the Cutter guy, he'll do the Cutter thing, that'll work.
Yeah, which is really interesting, and it changes your approach, right? Because if you don't have those abilities, interestingly, like, makes the game a lot more... I wouldn't say thoughtful, but like you definitely have to like approach it in a different way, and the idea of like waiting for bosses to do a move so that they spit out a star that you can then take up and then use that as a thing against them. It actually was really nice because one of the bosses in Forgotten Land, the tree guy who you always fight in every game, there's an objective to beat him without a copy ability, and oftentimes he will sprout out these giant coconuts and you have to like suck those up and use those as projectiles, and then also when he does an attack, a bunch of stars drop and then you have to use the stars to hit him. So that I think it's a nice kind of differential to the way you approach Kirby games, right? Because you can make that choice nowadays if you want to use copy abilities, or if you just want to go the pure experience and just do it by using the boss's stuff against them. And this game just kind of forces you to do that from the offset, right? Like you kind of that's the only way you get through is by waiting for them to attack and using their stuff against them.
And that's the weird thing about it, right? It does have a more deliberate... Every boss has a more deliberate design where you have to actually think about the patterns and stuff like that, rather than just like running up to the tree and hitting it with a sword as much as you can before it starts dropping apples like you can in like later Kirby games. It is that thing you're like, okay, I've got to avoid the attack, then I've got to get the apple. And for that reason, I quite enjoyed it for all of the 20 minutes, half an hour that the entire game consists of. It's very short.
It's super short, and I have this handheld, this kind of retro handheld I've been playing on, and it's great for my commute a couple of days a week going in, and like, okay, I'm just gonna play through Kirby, and that's a couple of train journeys and the game is done, which is kind of ideal, and is, I think, the game almost, it's so weird that the game feels padded even though it is like only half an hour to 40 minutes long. At the end they're like, oh, just fight the 4 bosses again. So in a row, almost like a boss rush right before you fight DDD at the end. But I enjoyed it for what it was, and it is relatively easy still. There was definitely like a lot of attention I had to pay to fighting the final boss, but aside from that, it was not too much of an investment from me. And I think one of the interesting weird things about it from a controls perspective is, in order to float, you have to press the up button to start puffing up air, and then you can either press A to keep jumping, or you can keep tapping up. And it is this weird thing of like, you can't just keep pressing A to like jump and then turn into a puffball. You have to press up and then start pressing A to jump about. So it's a little bit like confusing in some senses, and they refined that later on to the point where you just keep pressing the A button and he just keeps floating. But curious that obviously on the Game Boy you still have limited inputs, but they somehow made a way to make it a bit more complicated than it needed to be, which is curious. But Matt, I know you've been playing some other Kirby games as well, as you kind of have a bit of a renaissance with the series.
Well, yeah. So I did the same as you. I downloaded I downloaded Kirby's Dream Land on the 3DS Virtual Console.
Got you. Yes.
I picked up Kirby's Dream Land 2 as well, and then I played Dreamland. Then I played Adventure on the NES Online app.
Right. Yes.
And that's Adventure. Adventure is such a sort of a step up from the first Kirby's Dream Land, and that's the copy abilities have come in. You've got the sort of the slide move. And it's also the first time where the final boss goes in really hard again. And it's funny. It was funny playing it after Forgotten Land and being like, oh no, they introduced this weird, scary final boss type situation in like the second Kirby game.
It's actually interesting when you think about some of those Kirby games, because like Canvas Curse, which is probably my favourite aside from Forgotten Land, also has like an almost eldritch horror ending with a boss that is wild and strange. And I've never thought like there's a boss in Smash Brothers from Kirby that you fight, like the big fly guy with the eye. Yeah, and I don't think I've played a Kirby game where he's featured in, but he's just a weirdo too. Like there's a bunch of weirdos as final bosses in these games.
Yeah, that's essentially it. It's very weird, and it plays on, and it's funny how Adventure plays on the first Dreamland. You basically end up having the exact same final boss fight first, and then you get to the end, and it's like, oh, you completed the game, and then it does a credits of all the enemies you fight, and then it has like 3 question marks underneath like an outline of an enemy. And I was like, oh, okay, so I guess I've not finished the game. I had to Google how to find all the extra things to sort of fight this final boss,
right?
And then so Dreamland 2 does something similar, and Dreamland 2 introduces like the animal buddies, and it is Dreamland 2 that really made me think about what I like and what I don't like about Kirby games, because the first 3 worlds of Dreamland 2, and it's compared to the first Game Boy game, it's much more expanded, but the first 3 worlds of Dreamland 2, each one is around one of the 3 animal buddies. So the first one's all around the hamster one, the second one's all about the owl, and the third one's all around the fish. And the level design is way more deliberate because of that. Like, it's all designed around those 3. And then for the next 3 worlds, suddenly they start giving you a choice about which animal you want.
Okay.
And suddenly everything feels less deliberate, and the level design doesn't feel as tight. And I was having less fun with it than I was before in like the early bits. Even though those early bits were easier levels, it felt like, when you do something, you go, that was what they intended, this makes sense. There's a little like satisfaction thing that just like unlocks in my head when that happens. And it didn't have that for the later bits. And that's what really got me thinking about Forgotten Land, and the fact that like, yeah, the levels themselves aren't deliberate, but it has so much thought about how you need to get all the extra secrets, how you need to do all these bits and pieces. And so I did that. And then I did Kirby Superstar. But not the
Super
SNES
Nintendo one?
Yes,
No?
but not the SNES one. I played the DS one because the DS sprites for Kirby are so nice. Yeah. I forgot how much I love DS sprite art. There's the real like nice chunky smoothness to it, and it just looks fantastic. So played through that. That's a weird game. It's not a one game. It's like 8 games in one, and I really...
It has like the kind of Great Cave Offensive and stuff like that. Did the DS version add stuff to the game, or is it just like a port?
So it had the main sort of 6 levels are in there, which is one of the first one, Spring Breeze, which is where the name comes from, I guess.
Okay.
Spring Breeze is just a remake of Kirby's Dreamland on the Game Boy.
Huh.
But with copy abilities added and like one of the bosses removed, I think, for like no apparent reason. So it's sort of a remake,
weird.
but they never advertise it. Really weird, right? And then you go through the other ones, and I quite like my platformers to be one game. I know this is a weird thing, but like every time I've tried to play Superstar, I just bounce off it because I'm like, what am I playing? Am I playing the right bit? Like, am I having fun? And then you get the final one, which is Marks, which is the weird. Again, the big boss fight in Smash Ultimate. And that's in the final of the 6 games. And then you get 2 more, and one of them is also a remake of Dreamland with this harder. Yeah, it's really, really bizarre. So I couldn't really work out. I played it, and again, didn't take me too long to finish, but I was a bit like, this one is less for me. And then I started Dreamland 3 on SNES Online, which never released in Europe, I don't think. So
weird.
I've never really seen it, but it looks more like Yoshi's Story.
Right,
like it's got this sort of pastel-y art style, and that I've sort of bounced off a little bit because it's getting more to that like there's more variety, more choice, and I'm sort of just like I'm just doing what you're saying. I'm just flying through levels and getting to the end and being like, well, okay then. Like
Dreamland 3, I was always thought that Dreamland 3 was the one that introduced all the animal stuff, but I guess that's like slightly different. Does it have any of that stuff in it?
It does. It does have all the animal stuff. Yeah, it just has double the amount, and in every single animal you get a choice between 2 different animals to pick from. And again, it just means that there's less intentional level design as far as I can tell. So I've sat there and been like, well, it doesn't really matter which one I pick. And Dreamland 3 I didn't enjoy as much as Dreamland 2. I think Dreamland 2, in terms of those early Kirby games, that and Adventure, I'd recommend playing both of those because I think they still really offer something. Dreamland 3, I started playing and I was like, I don't think I want to play this, so I think I'm going to jump straight to like Triple Deluxe and Robobot on the 3DS and finally finish those off.
Do you own them already, or you need to get them before the 3DS shop closes down?
I've got Robobot and I ordered Triple Deluxe because Triple Deluxe is a select, which is quite nice.
It's much cheaper as well, which is good.
I literally wasn't going to pick it up, and I saw that and I was like, you know what, 16 quid, I can hack that.
I've also heard, someone was telling me that you should play Triple Deluxe before Robobot because Robobot is just so much better that you probably won't want to go back to Triple Deluxe after you've played it. I'll probably do that. I'm definitely going to pick up both of those games before everything explodes and disappears forever. I need to set aside, I'm trying to set aside like 200 quid to just spend on the eShop and just get all the stuff that I want. But there's so many games, and some of them you can find still physical, but stuff's just growing in price, and I was very lucky to get a copy of Fantasy Life recently for like 15 quid, which I thought was a steal.
That is good.
Yeah, exactly. I was chuffed to bits about that, but there are still so many weird 3DS games out there that I want to get my hands on before everything disappears and gets very hard to acquire.
There's virtual console stuff as well that I'm thinking about, like Wario Land, all those games that are on.
Yeah, I have all the Wario Lands, thankfully. That was one of those series that I went through a few years ago, and all of those are there as well, except for the Virtual Boy one, which I always was annoyed about that 3DS never got Virtual Boy support because it was the perfect system to do it, right?
Don't get me started on that. I'm still furious about it. Like, just do it now. They could do it now. Like, it's not worth it to them, but I would buy all of them. So, like,
exactly. Yeah. That Wario Land game is supposed to be the best Virtual Boy game, so I want to play it at some point in a way that actually works. Like, I think the only other way I can think of getting like a true to life version of that is playing it in VR, right? Like having a VR version of Wario Land, which I'm sure someone's modded that, to be honest. I can probably find it somewhere. But
if the next Nintendo console is another Switch, and they go
which
higher,
likely it will be.
Yeah, if they go higher on the resolution on the screen, I can imagine them leaning more into VR. Or at least I don't actually want that for real games. I only want it for Virtual Boy. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And they had Labo as well, which in many ways is a Virtual Boy adjacent thing.
They could have whacked something in there, couldn't they?
Yeah, totally. But it does feel like one of those pieces of their history that they're just a bit embarrassed about. They just don't really want to bring it up ever or even talk about it. Although I think in Luigi's Mansion, is it Luigi's Mansion 3 that they have a Virtual Boy thing going on? It's one of the Luigi's Mansion.
It's one of them, isn't it? Yeah.
Reference it. which I thought was interesting because I thought like they just never want to talk about it again. But I guess they're okay doing like the occasional nods.
Surely it's long enough now. Like you can be embarrassed about something, but be like, look, we sorted it out with the Switch, right? Maybe that was it. Maybe during the Wii U era when things weren't going well, they were like, I don't want to remind them how badly we did before as well.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we're having our worst console since then.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't bring it front to mind. But yeah, hopefully that happens at some point. Cool. The next game we're going to chat about is one that isn't on Switch, but I think will probably come at some point, and is a very, very Nintendo style game. It's Tunic. Tunic is a kind of isometric Zelda-style game where you play as a fox. I think at one point it was referred to lovingly as Zelda like a fox, and has been in development for probably like a decade, I want to say. Like, I remember hearing about this game years and years ago, people talking about it, going to PAX and playing it, all that stuff, and I'd always been curious about it, and I actually played the demo last year, and I thought the demo was cool, but I think that demo didn't really give you a sense of what this game truly is. You know, it gave a sense like mechanically and visually, and like you're this little fox guy going around this world and you're slicing bushes down, and I have to say, like, one of the things that annoys me about this game is that the bushes don't respawn, because I love cutting them down so much. You know, the way in which like those kind of square bushes just bop and roll, like there's a softness and like a comfiness to them that is so satisfying and so nice. The fact that the game retains that in its memory of like, oh no, you've cut all these down now, you can never cut them down again, makes me irrationally annoyed, which is a weird thing.
There's a hard limit on how many times you can do that. At some point you have to start a new save file just to chop down bushes again. Like
totally. I would take a whole game of just chopping down bushes, because that system is so well done. But this game is very interesting in a lot of senses, because it basically tells you nothing, and a lot of the game is written in a language that is not English and is not an otherworld language. It's just a language made up for this game. And so it is a mystery of a game, and a lot of stuff happens where like you won't know how to upgrade your character, or you won't know what an item does unless you like use this thing in the game that is ostensibly an old game manual, right? Like everyone used to get in boxes that no one really does anymore, and they don't exist anymore. But like that was the way I think a lot of people like played the early Zelda games, right? Was, oh, you go to the manual and you figure out stuff from there. It tells you a lot about like what the items do and where you're supposed to go and that type of thing. And this is a facsimile of that, but one which is built with this idea of discovery and secrets in mind, where it will teach you core game mechanics that you will not know otherwise about the game, just by kind of like deducing from images and button prompts and things that it shows on the screen. And it's really interesting. So at this point, I think I want to say 8 hours into the game, and I've kind of got past the first section, which is getting the three kind of like orbs or whatever. The three like, you know, like Zelda, you get the water one, the fire one, it's the Triforce, of course, yeah. But they're all like elementals, and you bring them together, and then something happens, and I'm kind of in the midst of doing that part of the game. And I think that there's going to be even more weird stuff that gets revealed as you go along. But
it feels like it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know whereabouts you are in the game, because you're also playing them out.
I literally just I've just put the three things into where they need to go, and that's it. Yes. That's as far as I've gotten.
And you know the interesting thing, after you do that, you have no idea what to do, so you have to kind of like figure out what to do after that, which took me a little while actually.
I literally got an achievement that was like, what now? At that point, the game just goes, work it out for yourself. But it
really is that kind of inverse thing, right? Of like, you play that in Zelda and they're like, right, now the Temple of Time is open and you go back and you become the older Link and all that sort of stuff. But this game's like, nah, fuck you, figure it out. Yeah. Basically.
Oh, it's really fascinating. That instruction manual thing, though, is really fascinating because it works two ways. You have gameplay mechanics that are completely accessible to you from the beginning of the game that you won't, unless you get really lucky, you won't figure out that they're even a thing until you pick up the page of the instruction manual that tells you how to do it.
Right, and even the page at that point sometimes is hard to figure out what it's even trying to say. Because sometimes it will show you something and then it will say, oh, reference to page 24. And then you go to page 24 and you're like, okay, connect these two things together. Yeah. Is this what the game's trying to tell me, kind of thing?
And alternatively, you get pages in the instruction manual that mean absolutely nothing to you when you're at a certain point in the game. And it will only be like an hour later that instruction manual suddenly makes sense because you've gotten the item that it refers to. Or something like that. So there's just this sense of like, whether you're getting the manual pieces or you're just sort of wandering around, there's a sense that I don't think until I finish this game I'm going to have all the pieces together. Like, there's always something that's going to be a mystery to me. And it's so cleverly designed and so well put out. And it also really captures the feeling of old instruction manuals, like the little pictures and animations and unnecessary things. And I'm absolutely certain, and I say this, I'm not certain, but in my mind, in my headcanon, the developer who made this must have imported Japanese games when they were younger. Because this entire experience feels like trying to play a Japanese copy of the first Legend of Zelda with a Japanese manual that only occasionally has a couple of English words in there, right? It says HP, and you're like, oh, okay, I know what that is, but what's that? And I'm working it out from the picture. And MP, okay, strength, got it. Like, it feels like trying to play a game that's in another language with an instruction manual that's also in another language.
Yeah,
but just sort of piecing the bits together, and it's so it makes sense to me that it took so long to make, because it's such a fine line to walk. To be like, I've never completely felt lost in this game until maybe the point where I'm at now.
Right. Yeah.
But I've always got something, and it's just this really sort of asynchronous and asymmetrical design of things as well, where like there's lots of maps in the instruction manual for different dungeons, but like old sort of like Metroid manuals and old sort of Zelda manuals and things like that, the maps aren't all designed the same way. Like, some of them are top down, some of these weird like isometric things, like it feels like you had like 3 different artists working on the instruction manual. And it has this wonderful feel to it where you're like, well, this technically is a map, but it doesn't feel like opening up an in-game map, does it? It feels like you're opening an instruction manual.
It's a stylized version as well, and it's super interesting because you'll enter an area and it will be like, okay, this is the frog's domain, right?
Yeah.
And you'll be like, oh shit, I had a piece of that ages ago. And so you quickly flip there and you see a little head of your fox character on the map, and it's like, that actually keeps track of where your character is, but you have to flip to that page in the manual to see where you are on that part of the map, which is it's really, really cool. And it also, like, there are certain things like in those maps that show you, oh, there's this little cave with eyes in it, and often that will indicate something, a specific thing that is constant throughout the game, or it will have like things linking together saying, okay, if you connect this and you connect this, then this will happen. Not to spoil anything, but like, there is a thing where if you are in front of one object and you're holding down a button for a certain period of time, like, it really recalls like Zelda 2 or like Castlevania 2, where you are just in this random point, Castlevania 2 especially, where you're like, okay, I'm just going to be on this ledge and I'm just going to hold down for like 7 seconds and then this thing will appear, right? Which was just so esoteric and bullshit back in the day, because like, who the hell is ever going to figure that out? But this game feels like it takes that idea and it runs with it, but makes it actually viable for people to understand, you know? As opposed to like back then where you had to buy like a guide to know what the hell to do in Castlevania 2, because it was just so out there in terms of the nonsense that it expected from the player. This game feels like it was crafted to create that feeling of discovery, but also give you the tools to understand how to do that stuff, right? Which is fantastic, and I think it's such a clever way of doing things.
Oh, it's really, really clever. I was wondering when I was playing it, I was like, I wonder if early in development, if you had access to the entire instruction manual first, because the idea of picking it up, that seems to be such where the balance lies, right? Like, if you just had that entire manual from the beginning, you'd sort of be able to do stuff. It would work the same way, but there'd be an overwhelming amount of information, and you'd struggle to tell what was relevant and what wasn't. And the fact that it does dole out to you on the, like, this slow basis, and sometimes you get information that's slightly ahead of you. Sometimes it's further behind. Sometimes on one page that you get, there'll be a bit of information you need now and a bit that you need later. And it's just this this thought process that surrounds it. And it's so clever when sometimes you get one page and you're like, okay, I know what this is. And then you get the right hand side, and then you get the left hand side like an hour later, and suddenly you get this bigger picture, and you're like, oh, okay, and like it's really, really cleverly designed. And
one thing about the map itself is that it feels like it was owned by somebody, because there are parts of this manual where you can see like a biro someone has like drawn on as if it was paper, right? Like people would do back in the day, make their own notations on manuals. And like there's one page in particular where it's got a bunch of like stat stuff, and it's drawing like arrow up, arrow down on this one. Like literally looks like a kid has taken a pen and just drawn this thing onto the manual itself, which is like, it almost feels like you're getting a secondhand copy of something, right? Where someone has owned this thing and they've played it before and they've figured stuff out for you, and you're kind of like using their information almost secondhand to try and continue. It feels like almost community driven in a really weird way for a single player game, right? Where there's just discovery going on.
I'm curious, and not to spoil anything, but I'm curious if that's going to play into the story as well, based on what I've seen.
Same here.
I wonder if that's like even more intentional than it maybe seems. Like, I'm really excited to keep going.
For sure. How have you felt about the combat in the game? Because I think that might be a little bit of a sticking point for certain people. It's definitely a challenging game, and you can see it takes a little bit from Souls with like the bonfires and the Estus flasks and those types of things, but also the kind of a bit more slow, not slow, I guess deliberate combat, right? Where you have to be dodge rolling, and one of my biggest bugbears in Link to the Past that I've talked about on the podcast a bunch is how short the sword is in that game, and how it annoys me, how like little reach you have. And Tunic kind of does a similar thing where your sword really doesn't have a lot of reach, where you really have to get up in an enemy's grill in order to do damage. And it can be tricky because by doing that you put yourself in a lot of danger. I don't know, how have you found like the challenge of it and the combat so far?
Well, the developers played Dark Souls and Zelda, haven't they? Like that's
of course,
that's where this is
and Fez, I think, right? Like those are the kind of core tenets here.
And the combat is probably, I think the exploration and sort of like the way the world buries its secrets is the most interesting part of it. The combat is decent, and the more options you get as the game goes on, I think the more fun the combat becomes, right? Like it very intentionally like starts you off with just a stick, and at that point, like things are a little bit slow. And like you said, there's not a lot of range on it, and it doesn't feel... It's got the lock-on and the shield from sort of Dark Souls, but it doesn't feel as robust. And it has a dodge roll, but the dodge roll is really... It's more difficult to pull off than in most games. And it feels like an intentional choice, but I think I would be having just as much fun with this game if there was more invincibility frames in that dodge roll. Like, it feels quite harsh. And like, so I imagine you would have done one of the boss that you get for the final bit of the Triforce. Again, I won't spoil anything. But I found that really tricky.
I found it so frustrating that I actually just decided I'm just going to turn on the no-fail mode just to get through this, because it was ultimately, like, I think I got it down to, like, its last quarter, the first or second time I fought it, and then after that, I just couldn't get anywhere with it, and I didn't know why or what was going on, and I was using everything in my toolbox, but I always kept getting hit, and, like, as you mentioned, the frames for your dodge roll are really tricky, so I was like, you know what, this is not really the thing that I'm loving about this game. It's fine, and it's good, and it works, but ultimately I was like, I want to see what's happening next. I'm just going to kill this guy, be invincible, whatever. And I love the game lets you do that, right? It lets you kind of skirt by the combat if you need to.
See, now that you said that, I remembered that was an option. What I did was I cheesed it.
Know
the gun does big damage, but it uses loads of your mana bar. But there's a reusable item that heals your mana. Right. So I just kept using the gun essentially and then eating the things. Now
see, this is the thing, you mentioned the gun, and I also heard Giant Bomb mention a gun. I've not found a gun in this game, so I have no idea that where that is or where I get that or anything. And that's the kind of magical thing about this experience is like I've totally missed that, and now I'm like, where do I go to get it? And it's clearly because you already have it, and I'm a little bit further ahead of where you are, it's somewhere in the world, and I've just kind of missed that.
This is one of the most interesting areas. So you, obviously, to get to that boss, you have to go through the quarry area, right?
Yes, yeah.
And did you find the map for that?
I do. Yes, I have the map for the quarry.
I think the gun is marked on that map. If I remember rightly. But I came to the quarry from the wrong side.
Okay.
So for me, and I got really stuck on it because the shrine, like the bonfire area, wasn't lit up for me. But because I'd come from the wrong direction, I didn't know how to turn it back on. But it's basically I found a secret path there, so I got there before I got to the second area.
Yeah, right. That's the interesting thing. I actually also found that area really early on via a secret route that I don't think I was meant to find.
Exactly.
And died there and thought I'm way too early for this, so I went back. I ended up doing the second area first, got to the boss of the second area, decided I'm not powerful enough, found the first area, went and did that boss, then teleported back to the second area boss straight after that and beat that boss straight after him, and then I went and did the third. So there are ways in which you can approach this game from totally different angles, and yes, like the challenge is built in a way to where it makes more sense if you do it in an order that they kind of expect you to, but you don't have to necessarily. And like I said, I got through the whole of the second area before even attempting the first area, and it was just when I got to the boss where I was like, oh, this is too powerful for me, so I'm gonna take some time and go do some other stuff in the meantime. But yeah, I still think, as much as we're really enjoying this game, I still think that there are layers that we haven't seen yet that are probably going to expand that even further, and I'm really curious to see how that happens and what they do with it.
Because especially that third area really things start to go weird. Like I was playing it and I was like, I can't believe I've played Kirby and then this. Like they both have this thing where you get to a certain point in the game, you're like, wait, what? Like
there is a factory line thing happening where things are inside other things, and I was like,
things are screaming.
Holy shit, is this what has been happening the entire game? This is ridiculous and crazy and scary. I'm excited to find out what that, if the game even explains what that means. I don't know. But yeah,
because it sets things up quite early, because I don't think this is a spoiler. It happens in the first 10 minutes that you come across a chest in the game that has already been opened. And from then onwards, right, it just starts to... It seems to be building upon something there. Like,
right, yeah. It's toying with your expectations, and constantly just like... I think the other part of this is like the isometric design is really interesting, because on a more kind of like subtle secrets level, not like a macro secrets level, it is encouraging the player to kind of walk against every wall and every surface, because there could be a corner you turn that you suddenly go behind something that you didn't realize was there, and then at the end of that little section you have a treasure chest hidden and you're going to get something. If you see a waterfall in this game, go behind it. They reward you for that. There is always something behind a waterfall, right? They I think they really understand secret design in that sense, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later in the latter part of the show, but I think that's kind of core to what makes Tunic work, and
absolutely
is really special. So yeah, looking forward to playing more of that. The last thing I want to quickly check in with is a game called A Memoir Blue that came out recently. It's a very short game from Annapurna, kind of in the vein of the types of games they make, which is kind of narrative focused. Not very mechanics heavy types of experiences, and this was on Game Pass. It's also on Switch, and I think it's okay. Basically is what I'm going to say. I think it's interesting to me from the perspective that for a long time people have associated Annapurna with extremely high quality, and every game they put out is like an indie darling and a Game of the Year contender and all that sort of stuff, and they still make games like that. Like I played The Artful Escape last year, which I thought was phenomenal and absolutely adored that game, and they've put out stuff like Florence, like some really excellent games of that style. And I think like we're starting to see now a bit more cracks in terms of like the type of stuff they're putting out. There was Last Stop, I think, that came out last year that people weren't too hot on, and a couple other things. But A Memoir Blue, I think, also falls into that like, it's kind of okay. It's this story about this woman who she had like made a lot of success for herself in swimming. Like I think you kind of imply that she's like won the Olympics or something, and the start of the game is she's winning a lot of medals, and then you have this moment she's sitting on her couch and she starts thinking about when she was younger with her mother, and the game is this kind of like exploration of that relationship through a series of vignettes that are kind of built around this idea where she's underwater. She kind of is very surrealist. She kind of starts swimming underwater out of nowhere, and then you kind of just go through these different parts of her life that are a lot of the previous stuff is sketched out in these 2D animation sequences that are really gorgeous, like really well done, and they blend those nicely with like the 3D stuff, but it also almost makes the 3D stuff look a little bit worse by comparison, because the polygonal stuff is just not quite as nice and delightful as the 2D animation. But you like see her as a young girl with her mother, and kind of like their life and what they did and where they lived, and it tells a story that I think is just a bit too familiar without having anything too interesting going on with it. Like it's you could say it's emotional, but it almost feels like it's emotional from a level where there's nothing to draw you that you've not seen before, you know. It kind of, yeah, it's totally fine, and I think it does a good job visually and has some nice music to it. But like from a mechanical standpoint, you're very kind of simply interacting with these things. There's like a water glass, you know, like dragging pieces of ice to the bottom, and it's like, does that mean anything? Is there any symbolism going on here? I don't know. It just feels like, okay, there's this section where you're going to go on a boat, and there are a bunch of planks floating in some kind of water section above you, and you just kind of drag them down, and they just form into a bridge. And then you like go to this stage, and you're like putting things on the stage and pulling things off, and yeah, it's minimal, but I don't think the mechanics ever tie into the narrative, and I think that's kind of the weakness here, right? Because if you're going to do something like this, you have to do like what Florence did, where, you know, there's a moment in Florence that is really impactful where, you know, this relationship is breaking up, and you're trying to put the pieces back together of this photo, and they just keep floating apart. And like, that's such beautiful storytelling through the game mechanics. And I think the unfortunate thing here is that you have the story and you have the mechanics, and they don't really work in tandem with one another, right? So you never get one of those types of moments. But I think that, you know, it's only 45 minutes long, and
oh wow,
it's extremely short, right? So I would say if you have Game Pass, just download it and play through and see what you think. You might like it more than I did, but I think generally from what I've heard of people, it's kind of okay. It's kind of fine. It's a nice, like, if you want to beat something in an evening, it's there, and I think it's relatively cheap on Switch as well. I've heard good things about the Switch version, so it's like £5-6. So yeah, you can check it out there as well. And yeah, a nice kind of evening, kind of in bed kind of game. But you know, if I was to recommend a more recent narrative game that I have played that me and Bally talked about is If Found. If Found is just an excellent narrative game that people should really check out. So, but yeah, that's a Memoir Blue, and I don't know, it's just one of those games where I don't feel strongly about it in any direction, so it's almost hard to talk about because of that, which is interesting. But anyway, that's going to close us out for the first part of the show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this to take some of your emails. See you in a bit. Alrighty folks, welcome back to the second part of today's show. We're doing emails. What a revelation, a true innovation that we had. We decided, you know, no one else is doing them. We might as well take some emails from people and answer questions that you have sent to us. And if you, dear listener at home, sitting there on your couch, comfy and enjoyable, in front of your telly, listening to this while your family watches something else in the background, as I am wont to do often, you can send your emails to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. And I have to ring the klaxon, because Bally hasn't been here to ring it for me, to say that we need more emails. We're running low, so get on out there, people. Send them into the show. We'd love to hear from you and love to hear what you have to say, your comments, your thoughts, all that stuff. Of course, if you go to our Discord server, you can also hop into the emails thread there and leave a comment or a question or whatever, and we will take a look at it and potentially answer it on the show. So, yeah.
I've done it. I recommend it.
Absolutely, we have a testimonial here on the podcast, Matt, who has previously sent an email into the show. So, you know, it was a good experience. Did you enjoy the experience of sending an email, Matt?
Yeah, it was nice, but it's always nice when you agree with the thing, right? So I think I slagged off Mario Kart Tour when it first came out, and you guys were like, yeah,
it's shit, bad. Yeah, pretty much. So, excellent. Well, let's jump into our first email. This comes in from Justin from Pennsylvania, who says, Hi. What are your thoughts on Yacht Club Games' new title, Mina the Hollower? Honestly, this might be my most hyped game next to Breath of the Wild 2. It looks like it takes the best of both worlds from the Zelda franchise. An emphasis on puzzles from titles like Link's Awakening, but with plenty of action and battle similar to what is seen in Link to the Past. I'm guessing MBZ was sold the moment he saw the whip used as a weapon. That is correct. But I am curious to know if it has more action than you would like to see. Graphics perfectly fit the Game Boy Color aesthetic. Though they explained it, it is questionable that Yacht Club is using Kickstarter again, but people will obviously support it, and this might be my first Kickstarter contribution ever. Cheers, Justin from Pennsylvania. So yeah, Mina Hollow, I don't think we actually talked about it on the show yet, but it's a really interesting one from my perspective, because to me, I almost had the expectation that what Yacht Club was going to do after Shovel Knight was go further in terms of, like, the scope of game they're making. Like, a lot of people expected them to jump to N64, right? Like, you did an NES game, and, you know, maybe Super Nintendo would be what they did next, but it felt like they're a big enough company now. They spent years and years of their lives making Shovel Knight additional content and stuff because of Kickstarter promises. You would have thought, okay, maybe they're at a point now. They're a publisher in some senses now as well. They publish Cyber Shadow. They're publishing a bunch of, like, Shovel Knight spin-offs that other companies are making as well. You would have thought, oh, it's going to be like a bigger 3D project. And they have said they're working on 2 projects, right? So this isn't the only thing they're working on. So I assume that another one will be a bit of a bigger one. But I think a lot of reactions I saw from certain people were, oh, this is maybe a little bit disappointing from the fact that it's not as expansive or as kind of, I don't know, ambitious as maybe some people expected from them. That said, I love what they've made here, right? Like, it's again, they're inventing a wholly new character who you could have totally imagined existing back in the period of time, and they're speaking to my personal taste of, like, I love handheld games, right? I grew up with Game Boy stuff, and making a game that is very Link's Awakening inspired, but also you can clearly see, as they did with Shovel Knight, having that very intentional design that is modernized and is not held back by some of the issues that you have from older titles. It really is. It's like nothing else that people are making generally, aside from, like, much smaller companies making games that are very, they have to make them that scope because that's the only kind of scope they can make. Whereas I think Yacht Club, because of the resources they have, they can make something like this, but make it a little better in a few different ways with lots of interesting stuff. But Matt, what are your thoughts on the game?
Oh, I'm so excited for it, mate. The moment I saw this, I was absolutely in love. Like, I think Link's Awakening is one of my favourite Zelda games. It might be my favourite 2D Zelda game, and that sort of Game Boy Color aesthetic is fantastic. But then they're pulling from Castlevania, they're pulling from Bloodborne as well. Like, these are the inspirations they've listed, and I Castlevania isn't one of my favourite series, but I love the aesthetic and the tone of that. I absolutely adore Bloodborne. I love 2D Zelda. Like, I honestly, I hadn't heard too much from other people about this, so I didn't realise there was any sort of, like, disappointment. Because for me, this made perfect sense. It was like NES, you did NES and you did Mario, essentially. You did your platformer. Moving on to an adventure game like this, it just seems to make sense to me. And yeah, I didn't see it coming, so when I saw the announcement, I was just like, this looks fantastic. The music sounds fantastic. I love the sort of the gothic horror aesthetic. Like, it's a great one to go for, but they've not gone. But it's also got that cartoonish, like it's a little mouse, isn't it, or like a rat or something. Like, it's got a real charm to it, to the point where you're like, you could look at it and go, like, this could have been a Game Boy Color game, but like you say, they're not restricted by the actual restrictions of the Game Boy Color, so they can build upon that. They can have, like, all these mechanics they wouldn't maybe be able to fit into the GBC. And yeah, I'm absolutely, I'm so excited for this. And it's a nice thing where you're getting more and more sort of Zelda likes made these days, right? But I couldn't tell you the last sort of indie, not that they're indie anymore, but the last sort of indie Zelda like that didn't also have some sort of Dark Souls influence as well, like something from Software. And,
totally.
And it works really well, and like that, this looks like it's going to have something similar. And I'm just
ironically, Shovel Knight almost had that before a lot of other games, because it had the corpse run mechanic before that kind of just totally took over the indie scene. So it is interesting you mentioned that, because it doesn't seem as present in this game, despite this one you'd maybe expect it to be in this one, right?
And again, we don't have all the sort of details yet. There was a lot of gameplay gameplay shown, but not a lot said about the gameplay, from what I remember. Like again,
yeah. So they've actually shown. So they revealed it on G4, the rebranded G4, which is now just like Twitch streams and stuff like that. And they actually had a sit down kind of gameplay session afterwards that I watched a bit of. And yeah, it's got really interesting stuff going on mechanically, where you have this burrow idea where you can burrow under the ground and pop up, and that creates some really interesting like mechanics where you can have puzzles built around that. You can it feels to me almost like a Splatoon-esque thing, where they're kind of blending two things in one, being able to like burrow to get places, but also like use it as an attack when you burrow out of the ground, you know, multi-purpose in terms of its design, which is always very smart, and I like that a lot. And you know, very clearly cribbing from Castlevania from an aesthetic standpoint. Obviously, like design-wise, very Zelda, but you got the whip, you have the axe, which I think also acts in a similar way to how it does in Castlevania, like arc throw, but like slightly different because it's from a top-down perspective. And I think it's interesting with the Kickstarter argument, or like the conversation about it, because clearly they've been very successful, and does it warrant it? Like, does it make sense? One of the things I've kind of found, like being in publishing and stuff like that, is that there are a lot of indie developers who use Kickstarter less so as a funding platform and more so as a marketing platform, right? Like, you use a Kickstarter in order to generate buzz, in order to get word of mouth, because frankly, and this is the truth about it, most Kickstarters that you back, that is not enough money for the person to finish the game. Most people who make games and have a Kickstarter, they will also go to a publisher, because you need way more money than most Kickstarters make to actually make a game happen. And that's just the sad reality.
But it's easier to get investment, right? Once you've shown that there's this many people willing to back it, it's clearly a product that you have interest in. You can go to an investor or a publisher and be like, this is not you don't have, like, we're not starting from nothing. We've got some cash up front. We just need a bit extra to get it out there. And but they've also said, and this is where basically the issue around this is whether you want to take them at their word or not, which is that they said that it's less about the money and more about the community development, in a similar way to Shovel Knight, right? Where they were receiving feedback on the game while they'd give an update, they'd receive feedback, it would all sort of be part of it. And I may be a little bit naive. I think that at the very least, someone at that company would definitely thought that this was a part of the idea. But I also understand the resistance from people to be like, you've made a lot of money on Shovel Knight, you're putting out a lot of games that you're not kickstarting. Do I need to put any money towards this? But I guess at the same time, you don't. Like, I'm really excited about this game. I've not backed it on Kickstarter. Like,
same,
you're sort of almost backing it with the promise of being involved in the development a little bit. Like, not obviously hugely, but you're more involved than I am going to be from someone who's just waiting for it to come out at this point.
Totally. You know, if you want your name in the credits, or if you want, if you just want to, it's basically a glorified pre-order at this point. You know, that's what, especially from a company like Yacht Club, who you know will deliver and can deliver. It's not like you're putting your money behind a project that might take a decade to come out, like I have done with certain Kickstarters in the past. There's a game called Ghost Song, which was before the kind of Metroidvania like bubble became extremely large. This was on Kickstarter in I think 2012 or 2013, and it's still not out yet. I believe it just got picked up by Humble, so I think they're publishing it now. But that is one of those things, right? I gave my money to that project literally almost a decade ago, and I still don't have the game. So that's definitely not going to be the case with Yacht Club, right? Because they have a proven track record, and you know they already published their own games and other games as well. So it's a really interesting approach from them. The other thing that I just wanted to bring up is a really interesting thing that Yacht Club have done is they are actually very transparent about their finances. They wrote a blog on their website that kind of broke down, like, look, this is how much money that we made from all our games in this period of time. This is how many units they sold. Like, this is how much we lose through taxes and all these other things. And I'll read a little bit from it, but they say, what ends up in Yacht Club's accounts is about $24 million. Due to taxes, we spent around $9 million making Shovel Knight, more than $2 million on external games, which gives us $13 million for the next two games, but we've already spent 2 years working on them, and our current man month is about $12,000, which means we spent more than $7 million. Oh no, and we've got more than 2 years to go. Which is them kind of saying, like, look, running a studio, especially when you're like 25 people or so, it gets really expensive. It depends like where your studio is. You know, they're in the US, I think, and you know, if you're in like the West Coast, it becomes very expensive to run a studio just because price of living generally and all that stuff. And so yes, like you start with this big number, but also I know from publishing that like, hey, you have worldwide tax, you have the stores coming in, and every store, unless you're Epic, are going to take 30% of your cut, which is a massive chunk of the pie. And then you also have other factors going on, like this cost that you don't foresee, things that pop up. If something gets delayed, then you have to be able to cover that. And so I don't think necessarily that this is, Yacht Club, as they mentioned, they made $24 million. Like they're good. They've made a lot of money. But this feels like a bit more of a safety blanket than you might imagine, given the expectations people have for a company like that.
Well, I think a lot of people also put a lot of weight on sort of game sales. They can be like, oh, Shovel Knight sold this amount, they should have plenty of money. And you always asking the question, like, how many of those were when it was down to like a $5 in a sale,
exactly,
right? As opposed to the full price. I think sometimes you can look at a game sale and be like, no, that was clearly very successful. But there's some games that, like Guardians of the Galaxy, like those sales are going to be boosted since it had its first sort of disappointing few months. Right. But that game has been like 20 or 30 quid recently, as opposed to like 60 when it came out.
I think I got it in December, like a couple of months after it came out on Epic for £20 because their extra £10 off coupon thing. And that was great, right? Like that game's excellent and I had a fantastic time playing it. But they're not Square Enix, they're not making a lot of money through that. And, inevitably, as always, Square Enix just blames all their Western studios for all their failures. Meanwhile, they spend like 3 decades developing a Final Fantasy game that ends up doing like fine. But, that's another conversation. But yeah, it's a really interesting game. I'm excited to play Mina the Hollower, and I think the other smart thing from Yacht Club's perspective when it comes to like branding is that they make characters that are very easy to like create plushies of and stuff like that. Right? They're thinking about it from a marketing perspective too, and how they
move them into another game, right?
Yes, exactly. I think Shovel Knight has like 300 appearances in other games or something stupid.
Oh, so many, isn't it? It's just like,
it's crazy.
If there's an indie game that's doing any sort of crossover, Shovel Knight will be one of them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's fun and that's great. It's a smart way to approach things, and I am happy that it's not Shovel Knight 64 in a sense. Like I think that would have been a cool thing, but I really like that they've come out with a brand new game, and instead of continuing their already successful thing, which, to be fair, like Shovel Knight, they are still doing stuff with, right? You've got Pocket Dungeon, you've got the other game that's coming out, the digging one that's made by the Bomb Chicken Studio, Nitrome. I can't remember the name of that one. But they've got a couple of other Shovel Knight projects in the works, which I'm sure they'll continue to kind of build that brand. But the idea that they're going to approach this thing from like, okay, we're going to create a brand new IP every time, I just love that. I think it's a really smart
it's great.
thing to do.
Because mechanically, I'm sure there's no reason this game couldn't have been a Shovel Knight game. Do you know what I mean? Like, it could have been top-down Shovel Knight. It's literally like a burrowing mechanic with Shovel Knight as a shovel. Like, this could have even started life as a Shovel Knight game, but it makes... I would be weirdly less excited about that than I am about this. Like, I think there is something about seeing them do something that is ostensibly new, even if it's not, because it's based on, it's clearly a love letter to older games like Shovel Knight was. But it feels newer, it feels more exciting, and I think it's completely fair for this to be your second most anticipated game behind Breath of the Wild 2. Like, if this goes into those bits of your brain that like click the right way, then this will be absolutely up your street. Yeah, for sure. Thanks Justin for your email, and looking forward to Mina the Hollower whenever it comes out. I think actually I was kind of surprised by how late it's coming. I think it's sometime end of next year or something, which I'm like, it's quite a while.
I don't know. It seems like, I don't know, it's one of those weird things, right, where you're like, oh well, it just looks like a Game Boy game, so surely they can just put it out in like a month or whatever, but that's not the case at all, right? Game development is very difficult and weird, so they'll take their time on it, I'm sure, to make it very polished and great. Our next email comes from Albert from Austria, and Albert writes, Dear MBZ and Bally, with Shigeru Miyamoto turning 70 this year, his retirement in the near to medium term future seems somewhat inevitable. How will Nintendo change once she leaves the company? Thank you as always for your fantastic show. I finally caught up on all episodes you've released, all since discovering your podcast less than a year ago. I think I may have a problem. Best wishes, Albert. Thanks, Albert. Really appreciate that. That always makes me happy when people say that, because some of my favorite podcasts, that's what I did, right? It's like I started them, I was like, RFN, I just went back to the very beginning of that that show and listened to everything all the way up to the point to where I'd caught up. So very flattering. Thanks for that. A really interesting question. Miyamoto, I didn't realize, turning 70 this year.
You wouldn't know it, would you? Like,
no. I think there's something, like, Japanese people generally, like, you look at Sakurai and it's like, is that man Benjamin Button? He ages backwards, right?
Yeah.
Because he looks great for his age. And, you know, similar with Miyamoto. I don't know. It feels to me like he is more so now than ever a figurehead, a kind of mascot of the company, rather than someone who has like a core importance on the games that they make and the stuff that they do, you know? Like, a lot of his duties in recent times have been working with Illumination on the Mario movie, or figuring out how to do the theme park stuff, like the kind of branding stuff outside of the video game sphere, with him as kind of like a ambassador for Nintendo to be like, hey, no, the Goomba should look like that, not like this type of deal, you know? Just making sure everything, all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. And I think that because he hasn't like been involved like in a producer or director capacity in quite a long time, from a games perspective, I don't know that it changes that much about Nintendo necessarily. I think it's much from a branding and marketing perspective of like, this is the father of Mario. That's when things get a little bit different. But I don't know. What do you think about Miyamoto potentially leaving Nintendo, which is going to happen at some point, right?
Yeah, from a games perspective, I'm not worried, mostly because the stuff that he's been less involved in recently has been some of the stuff that I've really liked more. Like, it's things like Mario Odyssey, right? Actually having some semblance of a storyline to it, which was something that he was always quite adamantly against, and supposedly had to be fought for in Odyssey. And you see that with like Galaxy 1 to Galaxy 2, right? Like, he was more involved in Galaxy 2, and he went, nope, no story anymore. We're just retelling the first game for some reason. Like, it's just levels. And like, exactly. I know there's not actually a huge amount of truth to the Paper Mario stuff, right? But it's still like, I'm a big lover of the first game and Thousand Year Door, and you know, his name's sort of been associated with that series not being an RPG series anymore so much.
Right.
And like, I think he's obviously an incredibly talented game designer, but the sort of the focus that more modern Nintendo titles have had on story and things like that, and on how they create their worlds, I think I'm slightly more interested in than the old sort of like it exists in a bubble type of game design that he did so well. And but I don't think too much will change from now to him retiring, though, because like you say, he's not been really heavily involved for a long time in terms of the game design. He's involved in the branding, right? And he's involved in, you know, Mario and Donkey Kong. That's why there's a reason that Nintendo's theme parks are Mario and Donkey Kong first. It's going to be because Shigsy's been in charge of them, essentially. And it will take a while for, you know, I can't see a Splatoon area popping up anytime soon. Like, they're going to make their way through Mario, Donkey Kong, Zelda.
Although, having said that, that would be fun, right? Like a kind of like almost laser gun
it'd be fantastic
thing with Splatoon, right? It would be amazing. But yeah, I do think that. Well, think about it, right? Like, when was the last time he showed up in a Nintendo Direct? It was the one where they talked about the cast of the Mario movie, right? Like, that was the reason he was on screen, was like this thing that isn't to do with the games, that is a thing he's been working on as his pet project. And they have positioned other people in place of him in terms of those presentations. You know, I think in the older, even like 10 years ago when Nintendo Directs were first starting, he was a bit more present in them. And obviously Iwata was leading a lot of those, and you know, Reggie being involved. But now they've kind of transitioned where they have Takahashi, who is kind of presenting a lot of the Directs now, and you have Koizumi, who's become a bit of a character in his own right. And Koizumi, you know, talking about the Galaxy stuff, is like, he's the guy who wants story in Nintendo games, right? Exactly, he's the one behind that stuff. So it definitely is a shift in that sense. But I feel like you don't get as many of those weird like skits and stuff in those presentations anymore, and I think part of it is like you don't have Miyamoto getting involved in those types of things, and he still does interviews and things like that. You know, when Breath of the Wild was coming out, it was him and Enuma talking through the game, even though like I think the story was that they gave him the game and all he wanted to do was climb trees. And,
yeah.
And that was like his contribution was, yes, this is good. Let's do more of this. Which, fair enough. That's probably one of the best parts of that game. So thanks Miyamoto for liking climbing trees. But yeah, that feels like the capacity to which he's involved at this point in time, where like he still feels like a seal of approval on terms of what games they put out, but not wielding the same power. I don't know. Maybe he does wield the same power because like
he might still have that power. It's just how much he wants to use it these days, right? If he maybe trusts someone like Koizumi to do his own thing in terms of Mario and Aonuma with Zelda, like I reckon he could still veto something if he really wanted to. But
exactly, yeah.
I'm sure in an interview fairly recently he said that he was more relaxed about that. And people used to say that he used to come in and like flip the table, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And just be like, no, this doesn't work. Change it completely.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
And as well, I absolutely adore Miyamoto. Like, I'd absolutely love to meet him. He seems really nice. But in terms of game design, I think I'm quite happy for him to take a step back because all the younger guys at Nintendo have done a fantastic job. You look at the last 5-6 years of Nintendo games, and everything's going very, very well.
Yeah, you have a lot of younger teams, right? Like the team that made Splatoon is a much younger team as well. And I think that like those new ideas, those fresh ideas are great, and like just them being willing to take the risks,
That's it.
Having Breath of the Wild be as bold and different as it is, even just making a 3D Kirby game in the first place is not something you would have expected from them in the last kind of decade or so, because they seemed so all in on this 2D renaissance that kind of happened like around the DS and Wii era. They were like, oh, we made a new Mario game on the DS. It sold very well. What if we just made more of those and didn't really change much between them, and they'll still sell like gangbusters? And the whole new Super Mario Brothers thing has kind of faded away at this point, right? Like I'm not sure we'll get another one. They ported the Wii U one over to Switch, but Mario Maker became a thing, and that's a much more interesting approach, I think, to what they do with 2D Mario, and something that I enjoyed thoroughly. So I do think that Miyamoto leaving probably won't have as big an impact as people might expect from a game standpoint, but I think just from a perception standpoint it will be a little bit different, right? Because
it'll be a big change. Like not seeing him even like every now and again in a direct or like say in an interview and stuff like that. Like he's still the figurehead of that company for all intents and purposes, even more so since Iwata passed away, right? Like there was a point where it was the two of them. You associated them both together, but Nintendo's current president isn't very forward facing, and so in that sense you associate Nintendo with Miyamoto, and like at the Ubisoft conference, right? Like he wasn't there to announce the game, but
absolutely with
Mario and Rabbids, but it was Miyamoto being there, being like, we're partnering with Nintendo, he's let us use Mario. What a guy. Like and
you have Davide Soliani in the crowd just like weeping tears as this like icon of his game design career is like behind his game it still has a big impact on people, right?
I tell you what, one thing I'm quite excited for is the prospect of seeing Star Fox without Miyamoto at the helm. Yeah,
that's a good point. Yes.
Not because I think they're bad, but because I think it's one of the series that can most do with a shake-up, right? Because we basically had Star Fox 1 like 4 times now. Yes. And I'm really willing to see a new team under a new leader just have a bit more free reign to be like, let's just do something weird and interesting with Star Fox.
Well, it always seems like the reason Star Fox kept coming up was because it was Miyamoto's pet project that he really enjoyed, that he wanted to do stuff with. And like, I think we've seen this a bunch of times of like, if there isn't a champion or a cheerleader within the company to make something happen, stuff like F-Zero and Advance Wars are just going to sit on the sidelines for years and no one's going to touch them.
Even Metroid.
And I wonder, even Metroid, and I wonder if Miyamoto leaving like gets rid of that in some senses. I think part of the reason why he hasn't been as involved these days is because he just doesn't have the time, probably, right? If he's dedicating all of his time to theme parks and the movie stuff, his schedule's just going to be so stacked that he just doesn't, there is no wiggle room for him to go and have a little Star Fox project on his own. But like, you can tell when they presented Zero for the first time, it was always him front and center of those tech demos and like 100%. Project Guard and all that sort of stuff. It was always him at the forefront of those ideas. And once he kind of like doesn't have enough time for that anymore, if there isn't another cheerleader or someone to get behind that IP of the company, they're probably not going to do a lot with it in any time soon. So you just kind of have to have someone who cares about it enough to go after it. And I think part of the problem is it's never been an amazing seller, and they feel like they have run out of ideas for it, at least like what they've tried so far. But also, as you said, they haven't really tried that hard. They're just kind of making the first game multiple times over, and not really doing anything fresh with it. And I think they maybe get a little bit scared of stuff like when Assault comes out and they're trying these on foot sections and people don't really like them and it doesn't really work, and it's something that I think they can return to. I'd love to see Star Fox go back and try to do something similar to Assault, but make it work this time and have it be a bit different.
I think there's a better understanding of how. I mean, I know it wasn't that long ago, but there's still a better understanding of how you can do a third-person action game, right? Like,
yes,
I think there's
sure.
so many more ways they can take that with Star Fox than there was back then, and like that was before the sort of the cover third-person shooter became a big thing. Like you could do an Uncharted style Star Fox with plenty of flying sections still, and I think it could be a lot of fun. Like. Yeah, I don't know. It's a series that has always fascinated me, and I've never been able to get into that much. But I love the world and the characters. But again, they've never gotten past like 2 games worth of story before resetting it again. So
yeah, exactly. Unless you're talking about Star Fox Command, which I think has some wild endings and some crazy stuff going on with
when they join the Grand Prix or whatever at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Tying the F-Zero and Star Fox universes together once and for all. I think that ultimately what will have to happen for Star Fox is what is happening with Metroid and Advance Wars, where there's a Western studio who has a pitch for one of those series, comes to Nintendo and is like, look, we want to make this game. Clearly you're not interested in making it. Let us make it. And it's turned out great for Metroid. We'll see how the Advance Wars game is. But WayForward obviously have worked with Nintendo before in the past, very closely. And if there is a studio out there, even like Platinum, because Platinum worked on Star Fox Zero, and the Platinum are in a weird place. There's the potential that Microsoft will buy them. Who knows what's going to go on? I think there's some NetEase probably talks there as well. But Platinum is a partner who Nintendo have had for quite a while in the recent times, with Wonderful 101, which I just ordered a copy of. There was a cheap copy going, and
nice.
I have that arriving on Switch, so I look forward to checking that game out. But obviously Bayonetta is tied up with Nintendo now, and they did Astral Chain, so there's clearly a strong relationship there. They've worked on Star Fox before. They kind of have the sensibilities, and I think they can bring something in terms of third-person action to Star Fox. I think that's like a great fit. So that would be ideal. And I think that Miyamoto would probably be able to give his blessing for that, right?
Yeah.
And give that series some life. So.
And Platinum's good games are only releasing on Switch these days.
Yeah.
I don't know if you played Babylon's Fall, but it's
no, I avoided that like the plague. It seemed like one of the worst games in recent memory. So there's good Platinum and there's bad Platinum, and sometimes bad Platinum is really bad Platinum. So. We're not in a good place there for them. But hopefully Bayonetta 3 is good. Fingers crossed. Hopefully that comes out soon and is great, because that second game is fantastic. But just I guess to wrap up on Miyamoto, I think there will definitely be either, I don't know. The question is, will he die first or will he retire first? Which may be a morbid question, but
it is a morbid question. But he does strike me as the sort of person who'll be there forever, right?
And knowing Japanese companies and the way that their work culture works, it does feel like you kind of stay there until you pass away, almost.
I doubt even if he leaves, I feel like he'll announce his retirement, and in the press release they'll be like, we're going to keep him on retainer as a consultant for stuff in the future, right?
Yeah,
there's no. I don't see a world where he completely stops interacting with Nintendo entirely.
The biggest danger to Nintendo is them announcing his retirement and their stock price falling. That's the thing, right? Because there's such a kind of tie up with those elements, and even someone like Reggie, who obviously retired and left, like you can see a little bit of a difference in terms of how Nintendo of America run things, and Doug Bowser's not as forward facing and those types of things, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's still kind of business as usual. So I don't think after that kind of brief period where it's a little weird, then I think it'll be okay. So and then Nintendo and Miyamoto can write his tell-all book like Reggie is doing about all the stuff that he was NDA'd on and all that sort of stuff. So that will be interesting, I'm sure. But yes, that is going to do us for emails. Thank you everyone for writing in your questions. As I mentioned, running low in the bucket, so fill that bucket up. Send your emails to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com, or as mentioned, go to the Discord server, which is linked in the description description, and you can pop some emails there. We are going to take a quick break, but we'll be back after that to talk about secrets in video games. See you in a bit. Alright folks, welcome back to the third and final part of today's show. It is time to delve in, to dig into the depths of video games and talk about secrets in video games. I think it's definitely a relevant topic. Obviously we talked about Tunic earlier in the show, that is a game built around secrets, I would say, and I think with the release of Elden Ring and generally just this idea of secrets playing a big role in people's joy from video games, thought it'd be an interesting thing to have a bit of a discussion about and kind of talk about what we think about different types of secrets and how we approach them in games and how they affect kind of what we think when we play through stuff. So I guess maybe we'll start off by kind of talking through some different types of secrets, because I think there's like certain ones that I gravitate towards much more and certain ones that I'm not as big a fan of. And the first one I kind of thought of was hidden collectibles, right? This very much is like the Kirby mold of
Yes. Yeah.
You have these hidden objectives or these hidden things that you can find within the level, and this feels like a lot more of a Nintendo focused one, where they tend to do this in a lot of their games. A lot of their older games do it as well. Stuff like Yoshi's Island is built on this idea of finding everything in a level and the reward more so being that you found it rather than the thing itself, right? Because often the thing itself doesn't do much for you,
Yeah.
In Yoshi's Island you find those things, and I guess do they unlock extra levels in that game as well? I think they might do, right?
You know what they might do in Yoshi's Island, but because these are the sort of collectibles that are more about ticking off a box, right? That's where the satisfaction comes from, is going, well, this was blank and now it's full. But I think you're right.
Yes.
I think you might be right. It might also unlock levels, but that style of collectible tends to be collecting for collecting's sake, almost, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's almost like, I've discovered the kind of the secret that the game has put in front of me of like, this thing looked suspicious and I went over there and I did something, and it turned out I was rewarded for that suspicious thing, because it turned out there was a dude hiding under that hole or whatever, and I found it and it added to my collection. And I think this can go a couple of ways, right? Because I think Bally and I have talked about in the past how we're not really a big fan of having to get all the collectibles in a thing to unlock stuff that otherwise you wouldn't get access to. And I think the biggest example of this is one of our favorite games, which is Tropical Freeze, right? Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. An incredible platformer, just such amazing level design. And I really do want to play all parts of that game. I don't want to be locked off from parts of those amazing levels, but the game locks you off from them because you have to get the Kong letters in order to find those final, or in order to unlock those final kind of temple levels that are really good, honestly. Like they're real gut check challenges, like very almost Meat Boy-esque in terms of their design of just like you really have to nail every section of this in order to get through it. But to me, it's a little like the joy of unlocking those is great because it gives you a good reward for finding all the stuff. But I think just maybe the monotony or like the hard part is like jumping back in and not knowing where something is and like having that as a almost roadblock to get somewhere. And I think for me, secrets speak to me a lot more where I come across them naturally, or I'm driven to find them by my own curiosity rather than being roadblocked in order to be like, well, you can't get here until you found the secret, that's where it's tricky for me.
That's one of the problems with balancing putting secrets in games, is that you need to balance, it being something that is satisfying and useful to find with being like, what if they don't find it? That's where it comes down, right? And in the case of like Tropical Freeze, like you say, getting them all and unlocking a new level, that's a really big reward for finding all the secrets. That if you do want to do it and you do it, you go, well, this is really cool. I wasn't expecting this. This is great.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get it, that's then a negative, isn't it? If you're like, well, I don't want to find all the secrets, or I find this like long or tedious,
Right.
being locked off from, you know, a fairly decent chunk of the game until you find everything can be frustrating. And that's why like sort of hiding secrets to games is it's not difficult, but I think not every developer gets it quite right. Like it is.
Yeah.
It's almost like the bloody, you know, the amiibo stuff, right? It was like,
Yeah, yes.
it was like, well, do you unlock something cool with the amiibo? If you do, then someone else isn't getting that without having it. But if you unlock something rubbish, then what's the point of having the interactivity at all? It's totally. Finding that balance between the two.
There's a catch-22. Yeah, maybe I should add amiibos to this list of different secrets in video games. That's more like consumerism is the secret.
Yeah, I was going to say,
that's interesting. But I think Hidden Collectibles is definitely like the most Nintendo one generally, and one that they've leaned on for years and years. And there are certain games where I think they actually nail it with that stuff. Like the 3D Mario games are really good at this because they almost encourage, like, the interesting part of the level design in 3D Land and 3D World is not the main path. It is in fact all the hidden stuff that you find by going off the trodden path, right? And that's the reward in and of itself, is that you find a little platforming section, that the joy is actually doing the platforming section, and you get the coin at the end, but really the reward was, you got a little bit of extra level to do that was fun and interesting and good to engage with. And I always prefer, I think, that approach more so than collect it in order to unlock a new thing. And sometimes Mario games do that as well. I think you can only do that very last level in Galaxy 2 if you found all of the stuff, but also that level is just like a masochist dream, and I still haven't completed it. Like, there was a 3-hour, I think we talked about it before, there's a 3-hour afternoon where me and my friends were just playing it non-stop, 99 lives, and we got to 0 lives having not finished the level.
Wow.
It's extremely brutal. But yeah. Another one is Easter eggs, which I find cool, but I don't think that they are kind of like the big draws for me when it comes to secrets in games. They're always like nice nods to find. Like, I guess one of the most famous ones, which was accidentally left in a game, is the Easter egg for The Last of Us in Uncharted 3, where you're at the bar and there's like this magazine that's talking about a virus infecting things, and no one knew about it at the time because The Last of Us hadn't been announced, and they actually accidentally left it in the game. So stuff like that, I guess. Are there any like memorable ones that stand out to you in terms of Easter eggs that you've found in games?
I was thinking, like, I know the Hitman games tend to have some really cool stuff, and all that tends to be is like if you do a series of events in a funny order, you'll get something really bizarre happen. In one, there was like a storm that whips up, and in another, a hippo comes out of the water and starts talking to you about like blood spilling and things like this, and that's really cool little things. I'm trying to think, because it's funny that you say it, because every year around Christmas we do a best Easter eggs of the year.
Oh, nice.
Thing on the website. So, and the Hitman ones are the ones that always really stick out to me as being like, they're just weird. And like, I think there's that sort of thing. But sometimes the other issue of Easter eggs is that if they're too well hidden, a lot of them are very well hidden to the point where most people won't come across them, right? Like, it's something that you'll find out about on the internet. Yeah, and sometimes you have to have a frame of reference for them as well, right? Like, one of my ones that I always think about is there's a little Triforce etched into a tree in Ori and the Blind Forest, and, you can run past that area and just totally ignore that and miss it completely. But if you spend a little time just there and looking at the environment, you'll see this little thing etched in. It's like, well, you have to be a Zelda fan, you have to understand what that is. So there is almost like this this kind of second-hand like reference that you have to have in order to enjoy an Easter egg sometimes in the first place. And I'm sure there's been plenty of Easter eggs that I've come across that I'm like, well, I don't know what the reference is, so I don't really get it. So it feels almost like a superficial secret, one that like you can engage with a little bit, but is not really adding or changing much about the game, I guess. And you're right. You have to have a frame reference, because like there's a lot of things that you would just walk past that you wouldn't even know was a thing, right? Like, I know a lot of games have bonfires from Dark Souls in them, which is just a sword in a fire. But if you've got no context for that, you just see that or not see it at all. You know what I mean? Like, if it's just sort of set dressing and you don't think too much about it. So Easter eggs are nice, aren't they? But they're not like they're they're not a consistent way to hide secrets in a game, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. There is one in Elden Ring actually that was brought to my attention that because I've never read Berserk, but Berserk obviously a very famous manga,
Yes,
and the creator passed away recently. And there are a bunch of places in the game where there are these giant swords just in the ground, and supposedly that's a Berserk reference. And like I would have just thought that's a natural part of the world, but supposedly, you know, it kind of ties into the influence that series has had on Miyazaki and on his games as well, which is a really cool thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they're done well, like that is, it just feels like the tapestry of whatever the game is already, you know. So yeah, kind of blends in, and even if you don't get it, it's still cool to kind of look at and see. Another one is kind of like bonus levels or like hidden paths in areas. I guess this kind of ties in a little bit to what we were talking about with hidden collectibles, but the one I think about is Ollie Ollie, the original Ollie Ollie games, where you would only unlock levels if you were able to hit a high enough score in order to get them. And so they weren't necessarily, I guess, secrets in some ways, but like you had to be able to be good enough to achieve the thing in order to get enough points to then unlock the next thing. And for me, these have always been ones that I'm not a big fan of, especially in games where I'm not good enough to kind of open up the next part of the game. Like it's almost like the game blocks you off. And Kirby kind of does this, but like it's very generous with it, right? You don't need to find that many Waddle Dees in order to unlock the boss. Like just through natural play and just being curious throughout the game.
You'll normally unlock the boss door regardless, right?
Yeah, I always had enough, right? I never had to go and scour levels to get enough to get through. But there was a game, what's the name of it? It was a Horizon Chase Turbo, I think, which is a racing game that came out a while ago, and it was on Switch, but I played it. It was on free on the Epic Store, and I kind of downloaded it just to check it out and see what it was about because I was interested. But that's a racing game which I'm not very good at, and you had to come first in a bunch of races in order to get enough points to unlock the next part of the game. And the Trials games do this as well, where if you don't have enough points, you kind of get locked off from the rest of it. And yeah, it's never been one of my favorite kind of approaches when it comes down to it. But yeah, I don't know how you feel about those.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to the collectibles one at the beginning, and most of the time in something like Ollie Ollie, I probably won't end up going to those secret levels. Like I'll get as much as I want out of a game, and that tends to be, you know, if you want to really push your skill barrier on something, you can really keep going with that and push past it. But yeah, in terms of sort of hiding secret areas and stuff like that, like especially if it's hidden behind a skill thing, it's highly dependent on how I feel at the time. And yeah, similar to the collectibles one, it's not. They're sort of not secrets, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes, yeah.
There's secrets that are not intended to be secret.
Yeah, they're almost blocked off because of your skill as opposed to anything else.
As opposed to one of the probably one of the next type of secrets we'll talk about, which is the sort of stuff that you're seeing in Tunic and Elden Ring, right? Which is like,
and Breath of the Wild as well.
Yeah, exactly. Breath of the Wild is a perfect example, which is. It's secret in terms of you may never see it. That's the thing. I think my favourite secrets in games are the ones where the developer's gone, I don't really mind if you miss this, like, because that makes it more special for those who do find it.
Exactly.
And that's what's been. I think that's what's captured so many people with Elden Ring, right? Like the amount of stuff that I've seen online where I've gone, oh god, I didn't know about that. Like, how did I miss that entire bit? I was in that area and stuff like that. And like the From Software games have always done this. There's, you know, classically like illusory walls in most of their sort of Dark Souls games, which if you literally don't hit a wall, which why would you? You miss out on huge, you know, like armor sets and stuff like that, but you don't know you're missing it, and that's the important thing. You don't. It's not needed to carry on. You just get something cool behind it. And even if you don't use that stuff, because that's what I found in Elden Ring, like the amount of times that I did find a secret and you get an item and I see it and I'm never going to use this because it doesn't fit my build. But I don't go, oh, that's disappointing. I'm still like, oh, that's really cool. It's a completely unique piece of gear that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And like, I don't know, you haven't been to this area yet, I don't think, but I fought a boss in Elden Ring, like a mini boss on the map that I could have completely missed and avoided. I had to go through a complex thing of like ladders to get to, but by beating it, I got its tooth as a weapon, and that calls down lightning from the sky onto enemies.
Jesus.
I could have completely missed it, but that weapon now saw me through the last 40 hours of the game, right? And
wow.
most people haven't gotten this weapon, and I think we said on the Discord, didn't we? The that area near the beginning of the game with where you go in with the stones keys.
Yeah,
sword
key. Yeah,
and there's that horrible rolling thing going up and down. Mm-hmm. And you told me about it. You're like, either I'm going to come back here or I managed to get through it. And I was like, oh, by the way, if you shoot the pots above it, you can kill that thing, and then you get a bow. You get a bow.
It's ridiculous, right? Because that whole area, obviously, if you take a stone shard, well, I can't remember the name.
I can't remember what it's called.
Too many shards and stones and all this thing. If you take one of those items that unlocks those secret doors at the start of the game, you can kind of do that straight away, which is way too hard for you to do as a level 1 character. And I came back there at like level 50, and already I was like, okay, this is an interesting challenge of like, it's a different kind of challenge than what the game has presented already, which is like you're kind of running down these corridors. It reminded me actually of Skyward Sword in the second dungeon, where there are boulders rolling down a hill and you need to run past them and kind of hide in cubbies holes. Like it has that element to it, but much more brutal and hard, and with a poison lake before it and all that sort of stuff. And then you get down to the bottom and there's a really hard boss fight that you fight, but then you're like, oh no, but you totally missed this other thing in this whole area that is another secret on top of the secret that is already there, which is I think that's the best part when it comes down to secrets in games is stuff like Tunic, stuff like Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild. The reason I think so many people respond to them strongly is because they are built around player discovery in a way that the game doesn't teach you, but also in a way that doesn't feel unfair, right? Because I do think older Nintendo games have this quality. Like the original Legend of Zelda is also that type of design where you have this whole world, you don't really know anything about it, you can find these areas where you can burn a random bush and you can go inside. But the problem with those games is the design was never intentional. Well, the design was built, but game design hadn't got to a point where it was favorable enough to the player in order for them to be able to figure it out. And one of the things I actually really like about Elden Ring, despite it having stuff like invisible walls, which is like, how would anyone find that, is that there's this community element where there are notes written on the ground. And so like reading notes and finding the places where potentially there could be one, obviously people always troll you as well and say, oh, there's one over here that when there isn't.
Try jumping.
Is a way to mitigate that issue, right? Is like having it almost crowdsourced with secrets where like you don't even have to go to the internet. Like you can be in a cavern and find a whole hidden path. And I did. Like there's multiple places where I found entire hidden stashes with like stuff that you wouldn't have seen otherwise if not for that one person who had put down a note saying, hey, by the way, hit this thing and you'll find something cool. And that's a really great way around it. And then as we were talking about with Tunic, stuff like having the manual that doesn't tell you explicitly but gives you enough information to where you can figure it out for yourself, gives you that sense of discovery and joy. And I think like the other element to this is stuff like with Breath of the Wild, where it's not just the discovery of places and things and items that you get, but it's the discovery of systems and how systems interact with each other. And ultimately, like the thing that I prize the most from Breath of the Wild is that moment where I killed a chew with a fire rod and it died and dropped fire jelly. I'm like, oh shit, like every part of this game knows and understands each other and is interacting in this way that is logical, built on the game kind of state and the things that it has available to you. So
I was like my one for that was putting a fire sword on my back and not freezing to death. Like that was such a big moment in that game. But the I think with Breath of the Wild specifically, what I think is really interesting is that few of Breath of the Wild's secrets are secret at all. They're all between every player. We basically found everything. There's obviously a few, every now and again you get an article, don't you, being like, this thing happens in Breath of the Wild and we only found out 5 years later. But in terms of like the places and the people and the quests, within the first week, everyone would have found it cumulatively. But by giving you a huge open world and by making so much of it optional, essentially all of it, right? Like you can run to the castle and beat Ganon. By making so much of it optional, everything that you've not found in Breath of the Wild is a secret. That like that area in like the north of the map where it's in the forest but it's completely dark and you need like torches. That's a secret to anyone who hadn't already been there. And like and so you get these discussions online between people talking about what they found, and in that way it feels like they've hidden so much stuff, but nothing's hidden from you. You've just not necessarily headed in that exact direction, right? But
Totally,
it feels like the developers have just put stuff absolutely everywhere, and it's from while Dark Souls and Elden Ring, they have a built-in community discussion. I think where these games are succeeding so well these days is with social media, isn't it? And with clips, and with people being like, "Oh, I just beat the da-da-da," and the 10 people underneath being like, "The what?"
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and it's basically brought back that playground discussion, which doesn't happen when you get older, unless you're lucky enough to work we're both lucky enough to work in the industry now, and you can go into work playing a new game and be like, "Oh, did you find this?" and have those discussions back and forward. But for a lot of people, they don't have those communities offline anymore. But they're now that's online, and you get this, and in that sense, it sort of boosts this sense of discovery and the sense that you've missed something, and that a game holds more secrets than you've found, even if you feel like you've been everywhere.
Yeah. Exactly. And like there are so many of those moments in all of these games that, as you say, like that you can, because Breath of the Wild is kind of built around this idea of sightlines, right? Like it's the Disney idea where it's weenies and people talk so much about like the castle being in the center, and you have that. And similar in Elden Ring, the Erd Tree is kind of that thing, right? It's this kind of grounding point that lets you know whereabouts in the world you are relative to everything else, and it gives you a sense of scale, and it kind of lets you understand how small you are in this giant world. And I think that's part of the charm of it, is like knowing how small you are comparative to these like big kind of points in the game. It allows you that sense of, well, probably no one has stepped on this exact set of ground at the same time, like doing the exact same thing that I have done, and it gives you that sense of uniqueness, right? And there is a difference, I think, in terms of like what Elden Ring does with its sense of discovery of like getting different items and spells and all that sort of stuff, versus Zelda with its almost mechanical discovery of like people figuring out you can slide on a shield and surfboard like down the side of a mountain. Like all that stuff is so rich, to the point where even later down the line, years and years, you still have people discovering stuff. And I think that probably will actually happen with Elden Ring as well. There is so this is maybe a minor spoiler for Elden Ring, but it's kind of like a kind of off to the side thing. There's a character you find who is after a cave, and she has this wolf, and she kind of fades away and becomes one of your spirits, your ash spirits, summons. And someone realized that if you summon her near an enemy that is the same wolf that she has had, she will jump onto the wolf's back as if it were her wolf and start riding it around. Yeah, and start riding that around and like firing from its back, as opposed to what she usually does, which is just like be an archer in the background. Like those interactions, and that's an interaction which like it does a lot of weight storytelling wise as well, because the idea is that this wolf has died, or is dying in this state of like passing away, and she's like, well, my favorite companion, I've lost you now. And so this idea that her spirit continues to have that kinship with that enemy is just like, it's genius, right? And I'm sure that with Elden Ring, you're going to continue to have, just like Breath of the Wild, those kind of discoveries that are just unexpected. But because they've taken so long to make this game and put all these little elements into it, people are going to discover them and keep talking about them years down the line. And that's kind of the enduring thing, right? Of like, it's a game like Fez that I personally bounced off a little bit because of how esoteric it was in terms of its secrets. Like, I think the good thing about Tunic is that you can play it as a Zelda game and have a really good time, even if you ignore all of the weird stuff going on, right? Yeah. Versus Fez, where I don't think Fez is a very good platformer, to be honest. Like it has like that cool idea of twisting around the world and jumping, but I don't think the level design is actually very good from just a platforming perspective. So if you're really going to want to play a game like that, you almost have to play it just for the secrets. Whereas I think these other examples are games that are still built around secrets, but you don't necessarily have to engage with them to get the most out of them.
That's entirely it. I think not the best, because obviously everyone has different opinions, but I think my favourite types of secrets are the ones where you can finish the entire game and have a fantastic time and not feel like you've missed anything, and then find out that you have. Like exactly. That's essentially it. If you go, I've had my fill, this is fantastic, I've had a good time, and then you can have a conversation with someone and they can go, oh, how did you find the da-da-da? And you go, wait, what? Like, what was that? And like knowing that there's more to go back to if you want to, but that you still had what felt like a full experience in yourself and you're satisfied with it. That's when secrets tend to be at their best. But it's a hard thing to balance. Like it's not an easy balance to find, I think, and that's why the games that do it so well really do stick in the mind so much.
Right, totally. I think that we're going to see a lot more of this going forward. A lot more developers kind of taking these cues and building around this idea. But it's also, I think, quite hard for like big AAA companies to do this sort of stuff because they focus test their games to hell, right?
Yeah.
And like a lot of the evidence they get from that is like, well, players are stupid and they need to be led by the nose to do everything and anything. And then you see a game like Ghostwire Tokyo come out and it's just like, it's this by the numbers open world game that has not really anything interesting going on. And I'm sure it like sells well, but it's also like you look at that and you're like, well, this could have been so much more. It could have been so much more interesting had they made certain different design choices and those types of things. So,
there's a budget thing to it as well, isn't there? Which is like,
yeah, totally.
For a lot of publishers, it's hard to be like, well, we need all of this money to put all this stuff in the game, but we're going to hide half of it from players. They might never see it. And then there's the question of, well, if they don't see it, do you need to like it? I think if you've put in that much time and effort into stuff, you sort of, a lot of developers want players to experience all of it, right? And there's a fear of them missing it. And I think, I think we will. I think you're right. I think we'll see more and more games just being a little bit braver in terms of being like, if they miss it, they miss it. Like the internet exists.
Yes.
People who want to find stuff will find stuff. There's a balance there, but I think you're right. I think we will start seeing it a little bit more in the future, and probably in smaller games first, right? Like,
right, yeah. And I guess all the three examples that we're talking about, Tunic, Elden Ring, and Breath of the Wild, all have extensive development times, right? Like a lot of years behind them, a lot of time to kind of refine and make sure those things work. And, that's the luxury that not everybody has, frankly. So, as fun as it is as a concept and something that is what makes games special, I think, in a lot of ways, it's hard to like reach those heights frequently, and so we often get games that are just a bit more by the numbers, and that's fine. But I think it also makes it a bit more special, right? When these games come out and are these kind of talking points that everyone has, that conversation around, it's a really cool moment, and maybe to some degree, if more games did it, we wouldn't feel as strongly about it. If it suddenly becomes second nature, then. It's not as special, if you know what I mean.
Well, it's part of the reason that Elden Ring has stood out to so many people and sort of drawn so many people in, I think, is that the idea that you could just find stuff like and little interactions around the world that are completely unique and missable, and I think it's part of the reason it's been so successful.
For sure. Are there any secrets that stand out to you, things that you remember fondly, ones that you are a big fan of?
So the one in the front of my mind is Elden Ring, which just because it's a recent one, but it was going into the woods in the first area and finding like a little stone building and being like, this is weird. And you're walking in, there's a little lift. And you're like, oh, okay, I know how this works. So there's a lift. I can't go up because obviously it's a small building, so I'm going down. Yep. And you go down, and then you go down, and then you go down. And it just keeps going down. And you're like, wait, where am I? And then you've been going down for ages, but then you look up and the sky, because apparently the sky now is full of stars, and you're like, where am I? Yeah. That it's nighttime and I'm underground. And I only found out later that like this whole area is related to an actual like quest line that you can find with an NPC, and he'll direct you towards here. Right. I found it hours and hours before that. And I'm wandering around, and there's enemies that are a bit too difficult for me, and I'm just sort of like, nothing's telling me what to do at all. And I found a load of torches that I had to light, and I was just sort of like, okay, I lit one, and I was like, okay. I saw another one in the distance. I guess I'll go like that. And like at any point I could have left. Like that's the nice thing that Elden Ring does. Like the fast travel just means that you could go whenever you want. You don't have to stick around.
I was just like, it's so freeing.
Exactly, right? But I was like, every time I got closer, I was like, okay, I need to know what's going on. I was getting my ass absolutely kicked by enemies who are too high level. I was getting sniped by these archers. And eventually I lit the last thing. And I think a tiny little message came at the bottom just being like, it's something I unlocked. I think it literally said the word something. Like it basically said something happened, and I went, well, what happened? And I wandered around, and I eventually found an area that I hadn't even seen the first time, so I didn't know anything had changed. I touched a corpse, and I entered the best boss fight in the entire game. Like, the music in that boss fight was incredible. It felt like unlike any other boss fight in the game. There was such a lack of aggression to it.
Yeah.
And I was just absolutely in awe. And this was in my like first 10 hours of the game. I beat the boss and I just went, wow. Like, I just had the biggest grin on my face. And I was like, I could have so easily missed that. I could have left and not pushed on, decided to light the torches. I could have not found this bit for hours, or I could have not found it at all. But it felt special, and it felt like, I mean, especially, I think it helped. Because obviously I was playing Elden Ring pre-release for a review.
Yes, yeah.
There was this real sense that I was like, I don't know if anyone else has done that. Like, it felt really, really special and missable and just unnecessary almost. That's the thing, right? There's no reason for that.
The effort they went in to like build that, and then also you go to the map and you click the stick, and it's that moment of like, okay, like this world is big, but also is it that big? Because holy shit, you know. That's again, similar for me. I had the same experience, but I think I found it maybe 5 hours into the game, and let me tell you, that was a wild ride. Like, because it feels like you're kind of almost like not supposed to be there at that point in time, and yet it's there. It's just like right there, just hidden away in this like almost unassuming. It's not like a cabin, but like it's just this building. It's just like, oh, it's just a building. Who knows? And you've been in other caves at that point, and it's absolutely wild. So there's so many, obviously, in that game. A weird one for me that is cool because I think it ties into the community stuff. And I didn't even go to the internet to kind of look up this stuff. There's a lot of things that activate in that game via gestures, and you know, if you're standing in a certain place and you use like the emote system essentially, which, you know, you can use it for writing messages and all these other things. There's a place I got to in the lakes, and it was, you know, this building with like almost this goddess inside it. Maybe it's a Marika statue or something, and there was no way to get through. And there's a message on the ground being like, first head, then something, then like emote or whatever word they used. And I deduced from it being like, oh, do I have to wear the head thing that person has on and also do the emote at the same time? And I'm like, I kind of store that away in the back of my mind. And then like hours later, come across this part of the academy. There's this tiny crab in this corner, like away from everything else, just like hidden beneath grass. Like you can kind of see it shining because it's got diamonds. And like you just kill this crab, which is like totally hidden away. And if you hadn't kind of scoured the area, you would have missed it. And I find that headdress from that thing, and I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So I went back there and I used the headdress, and I tried to use a gesture, but it wasn't the exact same gesture as the one before. So I was like, okay, I guess maybe this isn't going to work, maybe it isn't going to happen. And so later down the line, I come across this other character who sends me back to the academy to go and find some stuff.
Yes.
And I do a bit of his quest line, and I talk to him again, and from him, I get this gesture called Erudite, I think it is. And I'm like, oh, let's check that out. And it seems like it's the same gesture that the guy did before, the kind of ghost from that area. So I go back there, put on the helmet again, do the gesture in front of it, and wait for a second. And behind the statue, an ethereal staircase just appears. And I'm like, holy shit. This thing that like, if the community wasn't there to tell me what to do, I would have never fucking found it. Because who's going to go into this building that seems just like an empty building and put on this one specific piece of armor and do this one specific gesture in front of this statue to open up this staircase, and then you go all the way up to the top of it and you open a chest and you get like 2 really powerful spells, which I'm not using magic and my intelligence is low, so I can't use them. But it's still so cool. It's just like incredible moments like that happen. And
well, I didn't know about that. That's completely news to me. Like
there you go.
That's
crazy.
They're so good. The Elden Ring's really good.
It is. It's really good. And so like that just makes you second guess everything in the game. Of like, well, are there other places I can randomly stand and do a gesture and that's going to unlock it? It just opens up. I think that's the great thing about secrets in games like this, is that they open up the possibility space, right? Because like both these moments that we've talked about are moments that like, when you see them, you're like, well, anything's possible now. Like this, suddenly this thing that has happened has has just changed the rule book essentially on what you can do, and has just made it like an astonishing thing that you feel is this endless well of potential.
Well, you feel like a lot of games feel quite narrow, and I think a lot of the problem is that it's almost worse for people like us who have been playing games for years, because we're taught that things have to work a certain way.
Yes,
I think Breath of the Wild was especially interesting for this because I played a lot of Breath of the Wild without working out its systems. Like, the fact that you could put like a sword down and it will conduct electricity, because games don't normally work like that. I know like a lot of immersive sims do stuff like that, but like for a Zelda game, it's really unusual. And then watching my partner play it, who plays a lot less games, like Breath of the Wild was her first like really big 3D sort of adventure game that she played, and watching her trying to brute force solutions. And I was just sat there, like, watching and being like, "What are you doing? You can't do it. You can't. Oh, you did it!" Like the amount of times that happened, and for things to like work the way that you expect them to. Yes, I think for someone like me who goes, well, they clearly, it's easier for me to see what a game designer wants me to do, and therefore I don't try and work my way around it. And then to discover these systems, especially like in Breath of the Wild, and be like, "Oh, that works. Oh, that works," and like it's fascinating, and again, feels unnecessary, right? Like,
why did they put all this effort in?
Yeah,
but then it shows like in such interesting ways that it just feels special. Are there any other like ones that come to mind to you, either like that sort of one or any other ones like we haven't really talked about like secret or alternate endings? That's like another kind of part of secrets in video games, I think, like is a part of Elden Ring and Tunic and stuff like that. But with those games, it feels like, you know, if I finish Tunic and I just get the bad ending, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm probably going to go back and do the rest of it, because it feels like that is what it's supposed to be, versus stuff like Castlevania games where, you know, I played Symphony of the Night and I finished it and I didn't do the inverted castle, and I was like, I enjoyed that game, and then I came back to it a year later and I was like, oh, let's just do this just to see, and there's this whole other game like behind it. But yeah, oftentimes that happens with certain games, whereas like Hollow Knight, for example, where that game has a good amount of secrets as well, and all that sort of stuff, but something about it for me didn't make me want to go and get that harder ending. And I think it just depends on like what your tolerance is for that sort of stuff.
No, I'm exactly the same. And I think that's the thing. I think the secrets that are like completely necessary, like if I have to Google it, I think it no longer interests me as much as like a secret.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like if I hit a point in Hollow Knight and I get that ending and I go, that's a bit underwhelming, and I Google it and I'm like, oh, there's other endings. Yeah. If I can't sort of naturally work out where to do that, it doesn't really click in my head as a thing. And I think it's the same with like From Software games, things like Bloodborne. Like in terms of like individual secrets, I love all of the stuff in that. Like there's a whole area that you won't get to unless you do a certain thing, and I did it and it was great. Yeah. But there's multiple endings in that game, and like bosses locked behind those endings. But I'm not that interested in doing all of that stuff. Like I think I will on another playthrough, but on a first playthrough, I think that's what gets me. I don't tend to replay games all that often. Yeah. So if there's multiple endings and I don't know about them, I tend to not get whatever the special one is, because I tend not to like 100% a game on a first go round.
Exactly.
And I'll go back to 100% after I've already sort of not on another playthrough. If I can go back to before the final boss or whatever, I'll do it that way. And a lot of these games are like, no, you need to start again if you want to do this. And it's like, I like it. And I think for, you know, people who really appreciate replayability, it's a much bigger deal, right? There's a cool thing of being like, oh, there's so much more to do. Yeah. But yeah, the moment where I had to Google it and I end up following like a game FAQs guide through it, it loses a little bit of the magic that a secret can really give you in a game.
Totally. And I think so one of my examples of a secret that I always went after, but was one of those where I always had to Google how the hell to get this, is the older Fire Emblem games. So Fire Emblem on the GBA and Sacred Stones and all those games, they have secret characters in them, and you can't get those secret characters unless you do very specific things that are never really signaled to you in clear ways. I think the worst example of this is Fire Emblem 6, which was only in Japan and hasn't been localized yet.
Oh, wow.
There's a sand map where you have to. There are hidden things in the sand, and they're just randomly on these tiles, and you don't know where they are unless you have a character randomly stand on that tile and you get it. There is also a character that is missable, that you can't get them unless you finish the map in under a certain amount of turns that the game doesn't tell you about. And also I think you have to have another character in your party in order to get them, and that's probably like the nth degree of how complicated it gets in that game. But Fire Emblem games do this a lot, where they'll have a character that's on the enemy side and you could just kill them and just miss them and they're just gone for the rest of the game. You don't get access to them. But if you have someone in your party who like has a previous relationship with them, or has something that they can say, or like maybe bribe them with a bunch of money to come over to your side, you're able to add them to your army. And I always found that kind of like a bit contradictory for me personally, because I generally hate stuff like that, and yet I guess because I grew up with Fire Emblem games and it just became natural to me, I was like, oh, this is cool, I like this. And it feels like that's lacking in the newer games, where you kind of just know how to get everybody and it is never obscured at all. It's very easy, which it takes a little bit of the magic out of it, but also I think it's probably a bit more friendly to the player in a game like that, where having as many characters as possible is just makes it easier and is nicer. So
it definitely, because it is strange, because I grew up following like guides. I grew up like on like cheat code websites and reading game FAQs for like, even when I wasn't like that stuck in games. And it's a more sort of recent, when I was a teenager, I sort of switched entirely to being like, no, I don't want to follow a guide. Actually, I want to sort of discover things for myself. I think that started with like new Pokemon games coming out and me trying to go into Pokemon games blind without like knowing basically the new Pokemon, because that's right. Like I did that for the first time with like X and Y, I think, and those games are now way better in my head than I think they would have been beforehand, because mechanically,
I think so.
I don't think they're great, but in terms of like walking into a patch of grass and finding something, it's like, oh my god, I've never seen this before in my life. What type is it? What do I need to like? So I've sort of done a full 180 on being like how much I know about a game going in, how much I want to discover by myself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I had that experience with Sword and Shield, where it was the first time where I was just like, I'm not going to do any of this stuff, and then all of a sudden I got to the game and I was like, I don't know any of these Pokemon and it feels great. And I don't think that game's very good generally, but I think I liked it a lot more than most people because I had insulated myself and I was like, I'm not going to look at anything, right? And but for all these other Pokemon games, I was so embedded in the community side of things that like I would be playing the Japanese version of the game before it was out in America for like Gen 5 and like had all that stuff ready to go for like content reasons, and as soon as I was removed from it, it allowed me to take a different view on it, especially because like once you know the kind of back end of how Pokemon works with EVs and breeding and all that stuff, it becomes like the most brain dead game possible. It's just not to say that Pokemon wasn't already easy, but it just becomes even easier. A
bit of the magic must be lost there, like really peering behind the curtain, right?
For sure.
I tell you what, the final one that I will bring up actually as being like a secret that really sticks with me is all the Star Road stuff in Super Mario World.
I was going to bring this up, because hidden paths is also a thing we haven't really talked about, like hidden areas of levels that lead to a different exit. It's almost like a Nintendo thing that I don't see that often in other games.
Well, I always loved it in Mario World because the thing was, you knew there was a secret exit. They never hid it because it was a different colour icon on the map, wasn't it? It was... See, I'm colourblind, so I'm going to guess. I think it was red. I think it was red, wasn't it, when there was a secret exit, and I think green if there wasn't. Yeah. But so you knew there was a secret exit there. But it was the thing of being like, okay, well, I can come back to this, or I can do that, and finding it always felt really good. Like there was a real thing of being like, especially maybe it was because I was a kid when I was playing it,
right?
And maybe they were really easy to find. But I remember like replaying through levels trying to work out where the hell like this key would be, and then where the keyhole was, and then unlock it. It was that thing where you unlock new levels because of it, but if you didn't want to do it, or if you never discovered it, you finish Mario World and that's pretty satisfying. It was just a real big bonus at the end. And then you got those Star Road levels which felt weird. They felt weird compared to the rest of the game. They were slightly off kilter almost. And it felt like you were somewhere where you weren't meant to be. And in like a time in my life before I knew how games were made, it felt wrong to be there, and that was
Right,
amazing.
yeah.
Like, do you know what I
Like
mean?
you've broken through the barrier,
Yeah,
you know?
right.
somehow.
Like, and then talking to friends about it, same thing, and being like, "Oh, you've never been to Star Road," and like booting up your console and showing them, they'd be like, oh, "What the hell? How'd you get there?" Like,
Yeah.
that's where my sort of secret level lies, and that in my head, that's different to the collectibles in Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I think there's a distinction there because it's something driven by your own curiosity and like being like, oh, I saw this thing. Oh, there must be a way to get there. I've got to figure it out. Versus, okay, well, I know that in order to get this, I have to collect these things and I have to do it in every other level. That's the other thing, right? The thing with Mario World is like all those hidden parts are like there's one in all the levels. And so you can go in them and be like, okay, I'm just going to do this one regularly. But this one, oh, I found the key. So maybe I can figure out where the keyhole is. And I also think those levels are short enough and like bite-sized enough that it makes them much easier to just go back into and replay. Like there's never a big barrier to that. That's part of the reason I think the Kirby thing rubbed me a little bit the wrong way is those levels are long and they take a while and there's loading zones between each area. And if you do something at the very beginning and you get the objective, you have to still finish the whole level to have it count. So yeah, that is also I agree on that point. I do think that Mario World actually does it in a much smarter, better way. That's great. And those I remember playing because I played it on Wii U, and so I had save states, and so I almost played those Star Road levels like a Meat Boy game where I just like reload every time because they were just like really challenging things that you went to, gauntlets almost of different things, like using the balloon power up to like float through it. Almost feels like a totally different game, right?
Yeah, it's almost, it feels almost like the sort of the Mario Maker stuff, right? Like it felt like the developers had finished the game, had all the tools to make a level, and then just started to be like, well, what if we just did this? Well, like, regardless of how hard it is, because you're like, this is not part of the game, it doesn't need to be completed, so let's just play around with it. And there's a real sort of playfulness to them that is not there in the main levels, but they feel different and they felt weird. And they're all in like the night sky, and I just remember like that's really stuck with me as being like, this place is weird and cool. Yeah, just like the Elden Ring, but it's something about the starry skies and just being like, I should be here.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and that stuff will stick with you, especially if if you're younger. And I think that's kind of thing with Fire Emblem with me as well. It's like, it may not be great, and there may be some issues to it, but I think it kind of imprints itself on you, and I think that's a lot of the best kind of secret stuff does that. So. There we go. I think we've talked a good amount around that topic, and I'm excited to continue my journey in Elden Ring, and Breath of the Wild 2 when it comes out, which as we know has been delayed now and is going to be next year. But I guess the only thing I'm going to say is I'm glad that I don't have to have the Elden Ring versus Breath of the Wild 2 chat, because I didn't want to have that, frankly. And
that is genuinely very useful, and it's gonna launch next year alongside the Switch Pro. You're right. Of
course, that's inevitable. Definitely happening 100%. I believe it. We'll see what goes on there, but even the kind of little snippet, the extra snippet they showed, I was like, oh, this is exciting. There's a little bit of footage and them talking about like, okay, we're doing the skies, but we're going to go even beyond that. And I'm like, does that mean we're going underground as well? Because like Zelda fell down a hole, so I don't know. I feel like this game could be just enormous, and that excites me. I think part of it is also like going back to the same world, like we were talking about, is if you can't really do it a second time. I think that's the other part of these games that are built around secrets, is you can kind of do them once and then you almost want to wipe your brain of them to have that experience again, because you just can't do it another time. So
Tunic's gonna be weird. It's like trying to play that a second time around. You just fly through it if you've already got all that knowledge. Like
totally. Again, I was listening to the Bombcast and they were talking about how I think Jeff Gerstmann started a new game and he said he got that gun item before the sword, and I'm like, okay, so I guess there's a lot of sequence breaking you can do. I'm sure speed runs, again, that's another thing, speed runs of these games are so fascinating because they are so open and allow you to do so many different things. And I need to finish Elden Ring so I can go watch those ridiculous 30-minute speed runs that I think have been made illegitimate now because they've patched the game to stop certain things, but a lot of interesting things to take a look at. Well, I think that is going to close us out for the show. Matt, thanks so much for joining me on this episode.
Well, thank you for having me, man. It's been an absolute joy. It's nice to get lots of Nintendo thoughts out of my head and into the world.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. If people want to find you across the internet, where can they go to follow you and all your stuff?
So I'm on Twitter at Mattlorigan, so MATTLORRIGAN, because no one else has my name, so that makes life very easy.
That's a nice life to have, honestly.
Yeah. And you can read my stuff over on xboxachievements.com and playstationtrophies.org.
Fantastic. Nintendo need to make one of those achievement things, then you can have another website.
But yeah, that's what I'm waiting for. Every Nintendo Direct, I've got
NintendoStars.com, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's going to be a thing at some
point. The web domain picker up every time.
Right,
So-
yeah. You just have to squat on all those potential, like, words they could use for it, just so that you have it.
Yeah.
You could jump out.
Because I saw when I saw they did online missions, didn't they? And
Yes,
I read a headline for that and I was like, what? Trophies, achievements? It's not. Like,
No, it's not. It's like go and get these little things that you create to make your profile picture, essentially, which is, it's a way to spend your coins if you want to. I guess I'd rather spend it on game stuff, but go ahead if you feel that's the case. Fantastic. You can find this show and other stuff about it all over the internet. You can find me on Twitter at LordNBZ, and you can also find the show Twitter at TNL Podcast, where we tweet out stuff that's happening, sometimes polls, sometimes other things, and also has links to our YouTube channel and our Discord, which you should join because there's lots of fun people there chatting about things, video games, lots of people talking about triangle strategy in there still, which is a game that has lots of difficulty spikes that people are struggling with that I enjoyed a great deal. But if you're having trouble, head on over there and join the community. Obviously you can send emails to our email address, ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com, and as I mentioned previously, we need some more, so please send them in, or again go to the Discord and post them over there. And you can find the show in various places. We're on Spotify, we are on Stitcher, you can download us on any podcasting app that you have. Find This Nintendo Life and rate us. I believe on Spotify the ratings is on mobile only, because I've tried to do it on a web platform and I've not been able to figure out how to do it, but yeah, I think you have to be on mobile to rate on Spotify. But if you're a Spotify listener, that would be great, because they added that system and that helps obviously us find some new listeners over there, which is fantastic. And of course, if you'd like to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife, where we do bonus episodes and we talk about non-Nintendo games and all sort of stuff, and you can head over there to listen to our ramblings, we'd like to thank some of our patrons. We also have a brand new patron, so thank you to Ace, who is now supporting the show, and we also have a new $10 tier patron, and a change there as well. So our $10 tier patrons are Zach S, Atari Alex, Thomas, Matthew, and new patron Albert, whose email we actually read earlier in the show, which is fantastic. Nice. So thanks, Albert, for the support. You might have noticed that Bally's wife Caroline not on the list anymore. Obviously they're having a baby, or they've had a baby, and babies are expensive, and all that good stuff. So she's pulled support for the moment, but I really appreciate all that support over the years. Got to tighten those pocket belts, as they call them, with all the nappies that have to be bought, as we mentioned at the top of the show. So that's very much appreciated. But that's the update there, and I think that is just about it for the show. So Matt, thanks again for joining me. Again, it was nice to record at a regular-ish time in the day, good stuff indeed. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time, I think. But we'll be back next time. I think so. That's the plan. But who knows what will happen.
I look forward to listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I look forward to hearing his thoughts. He's played some stuff in the meantime, I'm sure. And I'm sure we'll get some stories about Bally Jr. and what's going on that front. So look forward to it. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye, folks. The musical interludes used on today's show were Moonlight Canyon from Kirby and the Forgotten Land, copyright Nintendo 2022, and Memories of Memories from Tunic, Copyright Finji 2022.